Summer with the Billionaire. The Blue Bay Beach Reads Romance Series. Book 3. By Ellie Hall. Copyright Ellie Hall. All rights reserved. Chapter 1. Billie Fisher hurried along the sandy street of Blue Bay Beach as the sun lifted over the lip of the horizon. She was rarely late opening Cove Café. She'd been working there since she was old enough to have a job, and even quite a while before that. In all those years, she could count on one hand the number of times she'd overslept. The routine was like clockwork. 6 days a week, she woke before dawn, got ready, set everything up for the day, and then unlocked the doors for the early morning regulars. The night before, she'd had a hard time sleeping because of the rumors that had been carried into town on the breeze, rustling the palms, creating ripples across the water in the bay. They'd since drilled themselves into her mind. If they were true, what did that mean for her livelihood, her future, and all the people she employed and served? Usually, she ignored gossip, but the restaurant was already on shaky ground, or a rickety old dock as it were. It needed repairs for sure. But after her quarterly meeting with the accountant, things were worse than she'd feared. The chatter about a resort developer disturbing her small, idyllic town didn't help matters. Billie would never admit to anyone she'd lost sleep over the issue, but the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. The squat and tall silhouettes of Alvin and Elmer, just two of the regulars, stood on the dock by the front door. "There she is," Alvin called. "We were just about ready to send out a search party." "Yes, here I am. Sorry that I'm running late, fellas." "Not to worry. You've had the lights on by 6 a.m. every day excluding Sundays and Christmas for how many years running?" Billie had lost track of how long she'd been working at Cove Café, but knew it had been 11 years since her father, the founder of the restaurant and her best friend, had passed. "I guess we can cut her some slack," Elmer joked. "I'll have your coffee out in less than 5 minutes. The bimini bread will take a bit longer." "My apologies." She turned the key in the lock and flipped on the lights and overhead fans. "Make yourselves at home." She gestured to the otherwise empty dining room with its worn hardwood floors, mismatched tables, with some made of driftwood, and beachy flair that only came from decades of genuine dedication and passion for the establishment. "We always do, Billie," Elmer said, settling at the counter. As she went about the opening tasks, Alvin glanced at a laminated piece of paper outlining what she'd long ago memorized. He then went to the walk-in and got out the containers of milk and cream. Elmer hopped up and set out the sugars at each table, including the counter. Meanwhile, Billie got the coffee started, then turned on the ovens and put in the first batch of bimini bread for the day. They prepped the lightly coconut-flavored bread the day before so it was always ready in the morning. Alvin and Elmer lowered onto their usual stools. One opened his newspaper, and the other clicked on his phone as they grabbed the headlines they'd use to engage in friendly debate for the next couple of hours, while they drank coffee and ate their bread. Usually, they'd return for lunch. According to them, it was exactly the kind of life they'd wanted to live after retirement. Soon, Billie had brought their coffee. "Thanks for your help, guys. You've done enough for us over the years." Alvin nodded in gratitude. "Every town should be so lucky as to have a gal like you." Alvin started to say something about Blue Bay Beach, but the timer for the oven dinged to indicate it was up to temperature, usually something that happened before Billie had unlocked the doors for the day. She twisted her long blonde hair into a knot on top of her head and went about the rest of her tasks, which thankfully weren't too many since over the years she'd transformed the restaurant into a well-oiled machine, where much of the prep for the next day was done the night before. She found it satisfying to thank her past self for making life easier for her present self, especially early in the morning and especially since she was running behind. That day she needed all the help she could get. As more customers filtered in, she felt slightly out of focus and preoccupied. It didn't help that the murmurs that an investment company set up a temporary, mobile office on the other side of the cove came in with them. More rumors reached her ears when she checked if anyone needed more coffee. I heard it's that same firm that built the Barracuda Beach Resort. When she stopped to chat with folks she hadn't seen in a while, she caught snatches of conversation. Did you hear they're talking about calling the resort the Sand Dollar? While she did her city work, she overheard the fuss and fear over what would happen to their town. They intend to buy up all the oceanfront property, even this place. By the time Billie got back to Alvin and Elmer, they were in one of their famous debates. They'll have to build the resort around my cottage. Alvin crossed his arms across his chest defiantly. They can call me the old man on the beach instead of the old man on the mountain. What'll you do if you're smack dab in the middle of the golf course and get whacked with a golf ball? Elmer asked. I'll throw it back, that's what. What are you going to do, Elmer? Sell out. Not over my dead body, but these guys know what they're doing. They'll do their best to drive us out. We have to be smart. And strong. Billie winked. She was younger than the old guard in town, but Blue Bay Beach was her home, and if what she was hearing was true, despite her anxiety, she would fight for it. She knew they relied on her too, especially as a business owner, to form an alliance and bolster them. It wouldn't be the first time. We're Blue Bay Beach strong. We'll charm the pants off them and send them on their way. That's a girl, Alvin said with a jovial laugh. Your father would be proud of you, Billie. Elmer tipped his hat. She nodded. Yeah. He would. But even if he could, he wouldn't see the knots forming in her stomach. Coconut Cove Café was her entire life. Nothing would come between her and keeping its legacy going except finances. Shortly before 8 a.m. Betty arrived for the morning rush. She was significantly shorter than Billie, which was saying something because even she needed the step stool to reach the top shelf in the walk-in. Her shock of white hair and always smiling eyes brought Billie instant comfort. Morning, morning, she said, greeting Alvin and Elmer, who were pulling out their wallets to pay. It's on the house today, fellas, Billie said, refusing their payment. We're paying customers, Billie, Elmer said. You were working employees today, she corrected them. We hardly lifted a finger. Alvin shoved the money at her. She held up her hands, refusing it. Come back later and get the lunch special. You can leave a big tip. She winked. You're pulling a double shift today? Alvin asked. It was more like a triple, but she did have the evening off. Don't worry, Claudia will be here later too. The two guys started talking about Claudia and her boyfriend's recent piano recital at the community center. Billie took the opportunity to dash off to bring out an order. Betty had technically been waiting tables at Coconut Cove Café longer than Billie had been alive. First while her kids were in school to help with the bills, and later because she enjoyed the social aspect. She always joked that she wasn't going to work, but to entertain her best friends. She slipped seamlessly into the morning routine. The two women worked in companionable silence in an almost choreographed dance as they swept from the waitstaff station to the tables, to the counter, to the cook's window. When the morning rush started to slow, Betty poured Billie a glass of coconut lemonade and broke them each off a piece of bimini bread, then added a few dabs of vanilla cinnamon infused butter to the still warm bread. It melted in Billie's mouth as she took a much-needed bite. She'd never tire of its subtle coconut sweetness and pillowy, soft center. The smell and taste always brought her home, not that she often left. Not with her responsibilities or financial situation. The Coconut Cove Café was a Blue Bay Beach institution, and the thought of something happening to it nearly caused Billie to want to crawl. under a mangrove tree, but instead of telling Betty, she asked about her weekend spent at an antique car show with her husband Gus. There were a lot of classic cars in town, including Billie's own Chevy, which was passed to her from her father. Gus is thinking of starting a classic car club with an annual show here in Blue Bay Beach. We could have a barbecue, Coco's Cones could set up for ice cream, and if you're up for it, Coconut Cove Café could have a refreshments table and sponsor a gift card for a raffle. Betty twirled her straw in the coconut lemonade. That's a cool idea. I think it would go over well. I'm surprised no one has thought of it before, Billie said. It's a lot of work to organize, but Gus has something of an apprentice now. It was his suggestion and he offered to help with it. The young man comes over a few times a week and Gus teaches him how to fix old cars. Our garage has been hopping lately. Gus always says they don't make AM like they used to. He's right about that. It's a good, practical skill to understand auto mechanics. Billie took a sip of the coconut lemonade. Betty grinned widely. He seems to be very good with his hands, is around your age, and... Billie flashed the ring on her right hand. Oh, right. You're fake engaged. I'm not looking for a relationship. Billie didn't have time for romance, except on Sunday nights when she settled in with a rom-com or sweet romance special on TV. Because you're married to this place. I know, Betty joked. The trickle started for the lunch rush and they both got back to work even though neither had sat down while chatting, but had organized supplies and restocked behind the counter. Billie found herself tired and preoccupied, and had a case of the butterfingers. Sunday, when she could relax, couldn't come soon enough. You okay, dear? Betty asked after they nearly collided. Oh, me? I'm fine. Billie picked up a knife that had slid off the plate she'd cleared. You sure? Betty lifted an eyebrow. Billie nodded. However, Betty was right to be concerned. Billie prided herself on rarely being out of sorts. Good, because today is your day. Betty waggled her eyebrows. Today was not Billie's day, but she didn't want to upset Betty, so she kept why she felt slightly less than fine to herself, though Betty had certainly heard about the rumors about the resort. Billie had to be strong and solid for everyone and not let them think she was worried or saw the resort as a real threat. It's your turn, Betty prodded. My day. My turn? Billie asked, not understanding, maybe she missed something and was much more tired than she thought. Just then, Isley appeared with a bright smile and Coco, her adopted daughter, on her hip. Hey, everyone. We lost Bunny. Isley went on to describe the little stuffed animal Coco usually had with her everywhere she went. I haven't seen it, but I do have a big hug for Miss Coco. Betty gathered the adorable little girl in her arms and sang her a silly nursery rhyme. Coco was practically the Coconut Cove Café mascot. Everyone adored her. While we're here, let's get something to eat, huh, Coco? She turned to the others. Don't tell Ford, but we've kind of been living on ice cream. Isley went on to talk about the success of her ice cream business called Coco's Cones, and how they'd started selling online using a delivery service that mailed the ice cream in insulated containers so it would remain frozen. They settled at a table right by the counter and Billie brought them a small cutting board with a slab of bimini bread on top. Her father, Frank Fisher, made the cutting boards himself to perfectly fit the small loaves of bread brought to each table after the customers placed their order. There was even a little divot to set the pats of butter and a holder for the knife. It was little touches like that, which brought the customers back, but it seemed things had slowed recently or that overhead had increased and Billie was spending more. Since her meeting with the accountant, she'd hardly had a chance to look at the books and really figure out where the leaks and fires were in her business. She'd hardly had a chance to stop and catch her breath. As she poured waters for Isley and her daughter, Billie closed her eyes a moment. She had hardly had any sleep. When someone brushed behind her, she startled. "Just here for my check. Sorry to surprise you. I forgot it last week." Claudia appeared and was all smiles. Claudia routinely forgot her check, her apron, and would likely forget her head if it wasn't attached. She supposed that's what happened after falling in love. Not that Billie wanted or even had time for that. No, she was married to her business and that was the way it would stay. But she loved that even her employees stopped in on their days off. Betty smirked as Claudia reappeared from the back office carrying the envelope containing her paltry earnings. Most of the women worked part-time and none of them needed to from a financial standpoint, none of them except Billie. Betty and Gus were comfortable with their retirement. Ford, Isley's husband, came into a fortune after the grandfather he'd never known had passed away. Claudia and Carter were successful musicians, especially Carter as the rock star formerly known as Wild. Fortunately, she'd tamed his wild ways. They weren't married but were deeply in love. Billie imagined they'd soon be tying the knot. Mostly, the attention from the press concerned Carter. He didn't want to bring that into their lives. "Good. You're all here," Betty said. "This is perfect. It's Billie's turn today." She shook her head, still not clear about what Betty meant. "You have to date the next guy you wait on," Betty clarified. The space between Billie's eyebrows creased as she recalled the batty idea Betty had come up with to initiate the new hires, earlier in the summer. She'd dared them to date the next guy they waited on. Betty was a romantic and wanted to see everyone happily coupled if not engaged or married. "That's not fair. I don't need to be initiated. I own the place." Billie shook her head, feeling slightly childish, but the whole idea was foolish. What if she waited on someone from out of town, someone who was married, or any number of other dreadful possibilities? She knew what could happen. Betty would just move on to the next eligible customer. If nothing else, Betty was persistent. She supposed her 50 years of marriage to Gus didn't happen by accident. Think of it as a way to demonstrate to your employees that you're a team player. Betty shook her hands like she held pom-poms. "I am a team player, I give you days off when you need them," she started to protest. "You have to ask the next guy that comes in on a date." Betty wagged her finger. "Don't forget she can't have waited on him before," Isley added. They knew she hated this. On second thought, maybe not. She was a team player and close to the other women, but she rarely talked about her personal life. She'd once had an employee who dragged all her problems onto the dining room floor and griped day and night. Billie made it clear personal matters stayed at home. Well, at least for her. That was the tone she set for the rest of the workers. Billie was no nonsense and rarely gave second chances. Thankfully, she didn't need to very often. Nor did she run into trouble with employees or customers, but she credited that to the fact that she made it clear it wouldn't be tolerated in her establishment. Although Betty, practically family, was exempt from pretty much all the rules. Betty gripped Billie's shoulders and angled her toward the other end of the counter where a man wearing a dark suit had just sat down to peruse the menu. He looked anything but beachy. "I've been coming here since I learned how to say no." "No, I'm not going to do it." Billie dug in her heels. The man lowered his menu, revealing a handsome face with a summer tan. His hair was trim on the sides and slightly longer on top. It would have the hint of a wave if he grew it longer. He removed his jacket and rolled up the sleeves on his button-down shirt, revealing defined forearms. The guy definitely wasn't a beach bum. He had a professional air, worked out, and took care of himself. Billie couldn't stop staring. Ooh la la, Claudia whispered. Billie snapped out of her trance and glanced back at the others, who were practically drooling over him. Even though they were in happy relationships, there was no denying that the guy was beyond good-looking. I can't, Billie rasped. Then she cleared her throat and repeated, I can't. I've seen him before. He's a bit of a flirt. Claudia winked. In that strong, silent type of way. The kind that makes you curious and tempted. Not that I am, but you know, it is summer, Billie. Nothing wrong with a little fling. He oozes flirtatiousness, Isley chimed in. I won't, Billie said. As Claudia said, he's been in before. But you've never waited on him, Betty said, thrusting Billie toward the end of the counter. Billie swept the loose pieces of her hair from her face. The knots in her stomach shifted from knots to a rolling sensation like jumping over a wave on a warm summer day, something she hadn't done or felt in ages. He glanced up as she approached. His eyes were dark and floated over her, top to bottom, like the bimini bread wasn't the only tasty thing at the Coconut Cove Café. The corner of his eyebrow lifted subtly and the edges of his mouth just barely curved toward a smile. It was as Claudia said, he was intriguing. She looked away, fussing with her notepad. Hi. She was so used to greeting customers and asking if she could get them something to drink before placing their order, she hardly had to think about it. But the words that came out of her mouth stopped at hi. Hello, he said in a low rumbly voice that reminded her of moonlit nights. She stood there dumbly for a moment as though entranced. The sounds in the restaurant, the soundtrack to her life faded, including the actual music playing through the speakers, one of Elvis Presley's love songs thanks to Betty's tuning the dial to the oldies station. The thick stubble covering his strong jaw could easily have become a beard but looked intentional in a stylish and rugged way, drawing Billie's gaze to his lips. His very full and very perfectly shaped lips. She swallowed. Can I take your order? A drink to start? She was turned inside out. Backward. The words came out wrong. I'll take an iced tea and the lunch special. The suit pointed to the board over her shoulder, inadvertently pointing at the women gathered at the other end of the counter, reminding her of what she was supposed to do. What she couldn't do, despite the whispering of longing tugging on her insides. She nodded and put the order directly into the kitchen window, shouting, "Order in," before hustling to get his drink. She felt Betty, Isley, and Claudia watching her, waiting for her report. She avoided them, keeping busy for the next 30 minutes while the guy at the counter ate his lunch. Just as Billie was about to tally up the bill, Betty gave her a shrewd, pointed look. It was the kind that would make a lesser woman shrink. Do it or no more coconut cream key lime pie, Betty leaned in and whispered. Billie may have become a lesser woman. She'd do anything to make sure her customers had access to the delicious pie that Betty baked. Moreover, she had yet to refuse a slice herself. Betty kept the recipe a closely guarded secret. After Billie tallied up the suit's bill, on the bottom she scrawled, "Will you go on a date with me?" She tucked it on the counter next to him at the same time as the suit reached for it. His fingers grazed her skin, sending a shooting thrill up her arm. She refused to allow it to settle in her belly and warm her through, so she hurried off to help deliver plates of food. The lunch rush was in full swing and she couldn't go back to check on the guy at the end of the counter, but soon she saw the suit, with all his swagger, waiting at the register to pay. He passed her a $20 bill. Keep the change. Oh, and the answer is yes. He winked at her. Again, the room went quiet. The answer is yes. Yes to her request that they go on a date? The clanking of a piece of silverware on the wood floor drew her out of what was sure to be her second trance of the day. She was tired. She'd hardly slept. Fatigue was getting to her. And stress. A customer waved at her, needing a new fork. "I have to go. I know where to find you. I'll be back." With that and a cocky smile, the suit strode out of the restaurant and down the dock. Betty appeared and gave a low whistle, apparently having witnessed the whole thing. "I sure hope he will."
Chapter 2. Rhodes. The second Rhodes was on the other side of the restaurant door. He flipped his phone on. It lit up with messages and voicemails. After too many interrupted meals, he'd started turning his phone off while dining. Eating and sleeping were the only times he allowed himself to be unavailable from his demanding job as the head of a real estate investment firm. He'd hoped his father would add and son to Bishop Enterprises, but when that didn't happen, Rhodes set out to make a name for himself. If his billions in the bank were any indication, he certainly had. He was sure that landing the Blue Bay Beach property would be the success that finally convinced his father that he was the real deal. The only problem was, his maternal grandmother had moved to one of the mansions in town. He'd buy her 3 of them, but in a different location. It occurred to Rhodes that his father had tipped him off to the town as a subtle form of revenge against his ex-wife and her family, Rhodes's mother. But he avoided thinking about that and visiting Memaw. Being on the water did little to diffuse the midday heat and humidity in the southern Florida town. He made a note to check with the bidding contractors to ensure that they not only planned to install top-of-the-line cooling units but had backup for the resort. No way would his guests endure the stickiness and humidity when indoors. The locals didn't seem to mind it, but when he opened the doors to his new resort, he'd have people coming from all over the world, up north in particular where they wanted to escape the cold, but not suffer in the tropical heat. As he walked to the car waiting for him at the end of the dock, he took in the vista of the town from the shore. It was scenic, a snapshot in time. There was a definite vintage feel, but everything was well kept. He had yet to speak with too many business owners, but clearly, they took pride in ownership with fresh paint on the wood and stucco buildings, abundant and fragrant flowers, and manicured palms, along with an amusement park quality that gave the town an enchanted feel. In fact, when he'd first scoped out Blue Bay Beach, he was certain Walt Disney had designed it himself, a secret little village created by the master of quaint, idyllic, and magical. But Rhodes's resorts were even better. That was the Rhodes Bishop way: find something that's great and make something fantastic. He didn't settle for outstanding. He created exceptional experiences and was routinely rated the best in the business. That's why he was a billionaire. As he got in the car, he turned back to the restaurant at the other end of the dock. It had a certain charm, but the dock needed repair and the thatched roof was well on its way to having to be replaced. He had an eye for details. It was part of his job to notice when things needed updating and sweep in and do the tough work of making way for the new. He'd have to be sure to get the bimini bread recipe before leveling the poor little restaurant, and the number of the cute waitress with blonde hair, blue eyes, and bronzed skin. He'd be sure she got a job in one of the world-class restaurants at the resort. He might go on a date with her, but he wasn't the kind of guy to go on a second date, just like he didn't stick around long enough to see the buildings in the towns he invested in demolished. Too bad it would all be but a memory for the history books after the resort was built. Rhodes Bishop didn't get to where he was by being soft. Rhodes spent the next few days in meetings with the teams of people who would see his vision through. The Sand Dollar Resort would be but another notch in his belt, eventually raking in money as he built his empire. His father, Martin Bishop, had done similarly in Mexico, where he'd find breathtaking tropical properties for cheap and build luxury resorts. Rhodes grew up in his father's shadow and was making a name for himself after his father had retired. Rhodes stayed closer to home on U.S. soil even though there was less land available in desirable locations. He took it as a challenge to buy out fledgling businesses, old homes, and then bring a resort to life in all its new, shiny, and opulent glory. The sun was low in the sky as he gazed at the building plans. He was meeting some resistance from several of the contractors because it turned out they had a certain nostalgia attached to Blue Bay Beach, having visited when they were children. That wasn't a problem. Rhodes had other outfits that would go in there and flatten the place. It just might mean he'd have to spend more money. That wasn't a problem either. When the property was completed, there would be over 200 luxury guest suites with all the amenities, a world-class 18-hole golf course, a relaxing spa, 6 swimming pools, hot tubs, numerous restaurants, and more. All nestled on the little slice of paradise that was hardly on the map. Miami wasn't far, so airport access was convenient. As he surveyed the rolls of plans set out on the conference room table in the mobile office building that he'd brought in as he got started, his phone started to beep. Word had gotten out that he intended to build a resort in place of the town, and people weren't happy. It didn't matter because money could buy their happiness if not their silence. The phone continued to alert him that there were incoming messages while he rolled up the plans. After responding to a few of the concerns and quieting others, he turned the light off and locked up for the day. Nothing would keep him from resort number 10, pushing well into the ranking of top billionaires in the country. His father couldn't deny his success then. Rhodes walked toward the shore to mentally superimpose the image of the sprawling resort with its hacienda-style architecture and lush landscaping against the backdrop of the town that would soon no longer exist. The waves at his back crashed to shore and he smiled because nothing would stop him from getting what he wanted. Never had. Never would. He was that kind of guy. As he strolled to grab dinner at the Coconut Cove Café and see if the cute little waitress was working, he almost stumbled over something in the sand. He bent over to pick up a small stuffed animal rabbit with a pink bow around its neck. His throat felt scratchy for the briefest of moments. Then, with the rabbit in hand, he continued on down the beach. The dock leading to the restaurant was lit with a string of lights, which was charming, but the sunset behind the building was magnificent. Bold shades of pink and coral lit up the sky as the golden orb seemed to slide into the water. As he entered, a waitress rushed up to him, grabbed the bunny, and then threw her arms around him. The suit saved the day. Thank you so much." She clutched the rabbit to her chest. "This is my daughter's and we thought we'd lost it." She went on to chirp about how grateful she was, but his eyes landed on the blonde waitress who'd cleverly left him a note on the back of his order slip, asking him on a date. It wasn't the first time a woman had expressed interest. Not at all. But there was something about her that he couldn't put his finger on that made his answer an instant yes. Rhodes was good at saying no, but yes was a rarity. A sign instructed him to seat himself. First, he strode over to where the cute waitress stood, folded over the counter, writing something down. He leaned over her and inhaled the scent of coconut and vanilla. She smelled like summer. "When are we going on that date?" he asked in a low voice. Cutie seemed to freeze, mere inches from him, but he could feel her warmth. She slowly stood up and turned around. She was no taller than 5 feet 5 inches and he towered over her. Usually, the women he dated were wearing heels so they at least came up to his chin. Her blue eyes lifted to meet his. She had a few freckles on her nose and her blonde hair was piled on her head like a crown, much like the first time he'd been in there. He wondered what it would look like if she let it down. He sensed the other waitresses watching him, likely the other female customers too. He usually didn't pay it any mind, but because of her delayed response, he felt a sinking feeling but quickly dismissed it. Usually, women had no problem telling him yes. Rhodes was a large man and although he stuck out in a crowd, he made it a point to be comfortable wherever he was. He prided himself on his swagger, ability to take over a room, and for being no-nonsense and quick-witted. However, something about the woman standing there threatened to disarm him. They stood, locked like that a moment longer. Was it her blue upturned eyes? Her slender figure with curves in the right places? The plump lips that he was waiting to hear speak? Yes, all of the above. "Feel free to take a seat," Cutie said. She gestured to the dining room. That was not what he was expecting her to say. "I'll be right over." She seemed to unglue herself from the spot and rushed off to the soda machine behind the counter. He took a table where he could see the last of the sunset. He had to be sure he optimized the placement of the ocean-facing villas to capture the view in all its picture-perfect glory. Cutie eventually came over. "Can I get you something to drink?" He smirked. "I thought you were going to sit down with me. Remember the date?" That was a dare. She cast a glare at her co-workers who were huddled together, giggling. "I see. Maybe they drew straws to see which one of them was the lucky winner." Clearly, she wasn't pleased about it. "How about we try again? Would you like to go on a date with me?" Rhodes was the kind of man who never gave up when he set his sights on something or someone. She was pretty and he may as well have a bit of fun while he was in town. She shifted from foot to foot, then blew a stray hair away from her face as though annoyed. I would like to bring you a drink and take your order. Oh. She was feisty too. He could work with that. After he placed his order, the other members of the waitstaff delivered his drink and meal. Cutie kept her distance, busy with customers. When he went up to pay the bill, she was nowhere to be seen. Maybe her shift was over. A shrug rippled over his massive shoulders and he took out a 20 and would just leave it with the bill. He routinely tipped double the meal. Then she appeared. Hey. Are you sure you're not interested in swapping numbers? I'll be in town a while. His lips quirked. Cutie bit her lip then shook her head. A woman with white hair appeared and nudged her. She was older, maybe even knew his memo. However, if he was reading the situation right, she'd encouraged, if not instigated, the dare. The cook called, Betty, and she dashed to the window to retrieve an order. Cutie remained standing there. So, no date. I'll be back tomorrow to convince you. Rhodes winked. In the meantime, maybe you can help me with something else then. I was told to look for Billie Fisher. The owner. Is he available? He asked. Cutie stood there. Unmoving. Unblinking. It was a small town, perhaps she wasn't used to guys showing interest in her. Then again, with her big eyes, beautiful face, and flattering figure, that would be a shock. I've left several messages to arrange a meeting with him. Rhodes flashed his phone. Who's asking for Billie? Her tone was flat. Maybe she didn't like her boss. His brow furrowed. Well, I am. He extended his business card. Her eyes floated over the simple, clean, and masculine font. Rhodes Bishop, she said. Why do you want to talk to him? You want to go on a date with him too? He couldn't read that woman, which gave him a certain kind of thrill, the chase, the challenge, much like taking ownership of the land in the town. If I recall, you're the one who asked me on a date first. I was just following up. But no, I won't be asking Billie Fisher on a date. He chuckled. Her eyebrow arched. Then what do you want with him? Rhodes straightened, trying to read her angle. It's about the resort being built. I'd like to talk to Billie, the owner of this fine establishment, about the property. He held her eyes and the confusion turned into amusement. She was playing with him. Yes. He was sure she'd meant to say it firmly. Instead, it came out all swoony and drooly, like she was staring at a slice of the coconut cream key lime pie in the dessert case after being stranded on a deserted island for a month. But she was staring at him and she'd say yes. Yes, he repeated. Yes to the date, or you'll go get Billie Fisher so we can have a word. She leveled him with a glare. Billie Fisher, huh? Well, that would be me, Rhodes Bishop. She didn't smile. She wasn't joking. The smirk faded from his lips.
Chapter 3. Billie. If Billie had been off-kilter earlier in the week when word had traveled across the coconut wire, in her small town, that an investor had been sniffing around, interested in building a resort, not to mention the restaurant was struggling, Betty's dare for her to ask the most attractive man Billie had ever laid eyes on out on a date had completely derailed her. The afternoon they'd first met and the following days she'd done little more than forget to reorder items that were out of stock, and she'd missed an important meeting with a woman who sold kitchen appliances. They needed a new dessert display or to just get rid of the old one and keep the pies in a different refrigerator. Not to mention she'd slipped up on orders and was almost late again after sleeping through her alarm clock, which she'd never before needed to use. She decided to keep a toothbrush in her office in case she ever had to literally jump out of bed and run to the restaurant again. Thankfully, Alvin and Elmer didn't seem to notice she was disheveled that particular day. But when Billie had received Rhodes Bishop's business card and made the connection that the suit, as all the girls had taken to calling him, was none other than the man who wanted to level their town and replace it with a resort, she would have liked to tell him where he could take his resort plans, but her fine establishment was a family restaurant, so she held her tongue. She couldn't stop replaying the scene in her head. She'd wanted to make a grand exit, but a flurry of people that were exiting barred her way. Instead, she'd felt his gaze on her, appraising her, surprised perhaps that she was Billie Fisher, the owner of Cove Café. It wasn't the first time someone had mistook her for a man. In fact, if she ever had a daughter, she'd name her Frankie, after her father, because he was the best person she'd ever known. Betty was a close second until the stupid dare. She'd asked Rhodes Bishop, real estate developer, destroyer of towns, and who for all intents and purposes was her mortal enemy, given his grand plans, on a date. She'd refused to meet those dark eyes of his, but in the days since their confrontation, she couldn't get them out of her mind. She didn't have time for the suit, nor did she have an interest, now that she knew who he was. Yet, she couldn't stop thinking about him. After yet another flub on the dining room floor, she tossed her apron on the counter and turned on her heel. Her fury grew at his nerve to try to date one of the employees of the restaurant that he was sure to soon put out of business. But she was almost more upset with herself because he'd taken up residence in her thoughts just as he did the portable office building on the north side of town. According to Alvin and Elmer, the Bishop Corporation drove into small coastal towns and plowed them to sea level before erecting luxury resorts that none of the locals could afford to visit. Sure, in Billie's deepest fantasies, she longed for a day relaxing on the beach or even taking a vacation, but not at the expense of an entire community. She wanted to tear up, crumble, or throw his business card back in his face, but she hoped never to see him again. Pulling it out of her pocket, she gripped it tightly, allowing the sharp corners to poke the skin of her palm if only to remind her he was the enemy and not the hunky stud in the suit, who'd said yes to her request to go on a date. Her, Billie Fisher, who'd missed dating in high school because she was always working, who didn't go to college because she was carrying on the family legacy, and who was well into her 30s with no prospects on the horizon despite Betty's insistence she find a nice fella. Along with her relaxation fantasy, she also had one that included true love with a happily ever after, but that was unlikely given her circumstances and the risk it would take for her to allow herself to feel that way. It came at too high a cost. The temptation of his perfect 10 good looks and smooth confidence was real. She instantly hated that he woke that up in her because she was married to the Cove Café. End of story. Billie disappeared into the kitchen. She continued past the cook, the prep area, the walk-in fridge, and out the back door. It was still warm out, even after the sunset. The walk-in would have cooled her off, but she needed to breathe fresh air. She needed the soothing sea. She needed her father. But all she had was the restaurant and her friends. She turned her gaze from the ocean to the land. At the end of the dock a very tall, muscular, and good-looking man walked past, thankfully not stopping. She'd never had to throw out a customer, but she wouldn't hesitate to start that day. He had the good sense to continue on down the boardwalk, probably going to the Shake Shack to woo one of the workers before kicking over the building and planting a flag, declaring it his own. Much to her dismay, she was sure that wasn't the last she'd be seeing of Rhodes Bishop. When Billie was finally able to bring herself to go back inside, the restaurant had settled down. All the employees got several breaks throughout their shifts, but she rarely took one. It wasn't entirely because she was a control freak and wanted to make sure everything ran smoothly at the restaurant, and she knew it didn't set a good example, but the truth was, most days if she allowed herself to stop moving, she would lose momentum. She was often so tired, if she stopped, she wouldn't be able to get back up. However, if she just remained in motion, she would make it through the day. Betty gingerly stepped over to her. Any updates on the suit? Did he change his mind about the date? Or postpone it? He's very handsome in a commanding kind of way. Betty smirked because her husband had been in the military and apparently, she had a thing for the strong silent type. Only Rhodes wasn't silent. He marked his territory all over the country by buying up businesses and land and developing monstrosities for vacationers. She shook her head. No. There's no date. Not the other day. Not today. Not ever. Why ever not? Betty asked. You hardly have a life outside the cafe. You could let your hair down. Live a little. Maybe fall in love. The summer isn't over yet. Betty, because I'm busy. Not to mention the suit is the guy who wants to take over our town. Well, he did bring back Coco's bunny. What? Did he take that too? That thief in his custom-tailored suit is no better than a common criminal. He returned the bunny. You can ask Isley what it's like to hug him. She was overcome with joy. Betty winked. I'd say he's captured something of yours, she emphasized. These last few days, you've seemed to be a bit preoccupied. Captured something of mine? Yeah, he'd like the deed to my property to build his luxurious resort, Billie sing-songed. As far as I know, he hasn't taken anything yet, dear. He found the bunny on the beach. Betty's tone was gentle. Maybe he's not as ruthless as he seems. Billie wasn't upset with her but remained quiet the rest of the evening while they closed down and prepared for the next shift the following Monday. Betty was right, Billie was preoccupied and she merely offered a wave as they parted ways at the end of the dock. Billie returned home. Another night spread out long as Billie lay in bed contemplating the rumors about the resort, her encounter with the suit, and the trouble the restaurant was in. The next day, she dragged herself to church and left feeling refreshed and connected to her Lord and Savior. Then she stopped at the restaurant to gather up items for the weekly meals she brought to residents of Blue Bay Beach that were in need of support. Betty dubbed it Coconut Cove Special Delivery and the name had stuck. First, she had a few items to do in the office at the restaurant. Even though it was officially closed on Sundays, she always went in, prepared for the week ahead, tended to the books, and the other administrative tasks common to restaurant owners. Truly, it was her second home and she enjoyed being there when it was brimming with people as much as she did when she had the place to herself. After balancing the books and figuring out the weekly order she called in on Tuesdays, she leaned back in the ancient swivel chair that still had the indentation from her father. She sighed. The Coconut Cove Café was so named because after Frank Fisher came ashore after 5 years in the Navy, he rambled into Blue Bay Beach in his brand new Chevy Bel Air in a shiny shade of seafoam green. It was one of the hottest and most humid summer days on record. He was so eager to get to where the white sand beach met the crystal clear water, he didn't notice the coconut falling from the palm tree. It came close to bonking him on the head, which may have resulted in a concussion, and instead glanced off his shoulder. It still hurt, but it also gave him an idea. He dove right into the water and decided he'd never leave that oasis even if he had to live off coconuts. After becoming fully enchanted by the then even smaller town, and a young woman who lived there by the name of Priscilla, they fell in love, got married, and decided to open a restaurant. But to keep safe from falling fruit, or was it a nut? Experts argued about exactly what plant family the coconut belonged to. And because Frank loved the water, he built the dock and then the restaurant over it so every customer had a view of the ocean. He and Priscilla poured their hearts and souls into the restaurant. Because the plentiful coconuts in the area had inspired it, they started adding the ingredient to a lot of their menu items. The bimini bread was Priscilla's specialty and had a soft, lightly sweet flavor with a hint of coconut. They also had coconut shrimp, coconut-encrusted onion rings, and of course, the famous coconut key lime pie. That was Betty's addition. Along with the bimini bread, it lived on, while Billie's mother, Priscilla, had not. Things weren't in a good state, but Billie couldn't figure out a solution to saving the place by remaining still idle. As much as she wanted to go home and escape into a rom-com or Hallmark movie, she was a secret sucker for sweet romance and happy endings. She did her best thinking on her feet. As she strolled down the hall leading from the office, she straightened one of the framed photos of her dad and mom on the wall. There were others of them with famous celebrities and singers. The Coconut Cove Café had been a place where people, no matter how famous or important, could rely on a delicious meal, great service, and being treated, well, normal. There were even a few photos on the wall of Billie in pigtails, one on her father's shoulders, another with a few members of the Beatles and Rolling Stones, and another with Dolly Parton. Billie smiled and the upturn of her lips felt rare, stiff almost. It had been a while since she'd truly smiled. Dad had loved music. Her smile grew as she realized that Betty always tuned the station to the oldies, probably in Frank's honor. He and Gus, Betty's husband, had been good friends. There were plenty of new people and businesses in town since Frank's day, but so much also remained the same. The tight-knit community, the friendliness, and the way everyone could rely on each other when life got tough. Billie had never lived anywhere else, but imagined those qualities were unique to Blue Bay Beach. Those thoughts carried Billie through her food deliveries to a single mother, a widow, the homebound, and several others who'd hit hard times or needed a helping hand. Coconut Cove's special delivery was weekly, and it was the least she could do. As she passed the restaurant with its sagging thatched roof, the dock in need of repair, and several other updates that she'd kept putting off, she didn't want to admit that she needed a helping hand too. As much as she wanted to flop on the couch, she resisted. Instead, she tied on her running shoes and beat out her helpless and hopeless thoughts as her feet pounded against the sand. The sun was still a while from setting, but backlit by its rays, the silhouette of a well-built man approached, also running, but from the opposite direction. Her stomach fluttered. Even though her anger toward him and what he stood for was as thorny as a rose stem, she couldn't deny her attraction. But she shoved the notion away, not willing to risk it and be left with bloody hands and a bleeding heart in the process. The thing was, he was as good-looking in a suit as he was in athletic gear.
Chapter 4. Rhodes. Rhodes could usually turn off his mind the moment his feet hit the ground when he went out for a run. It was his form of meditation, shutting out the billion-and-one tasks he had to attend to. One of his buddies coined it #Billionaire problems, and focusing on the rhythm of his breath. Usually, if he was experiencing a problem, the solution would rise into that open space in his mind and he'd come away sweaty but resolved. Most of the time it worked. But the last days spent in Blue Bay Beach, a slender figure with blonde hair filled the spot in his mind, even in place of the irksome bother of the continued resistance that he was receiving from the zoning board. Then there she was, running toward him. He could have stopped by the restaurant and asked her why she was so upset, what he'd done to offend her, but he knew. He was the uptight alpha with the corporation, the enemy. She was, well, she seemed uptight too, but in a beachy, laid-back kind of way if such a thing were possible. Rhodes wasn't used to a woman telling him no or that she wasn't interested. In fact, it had never happened before. He slowed to a jog as she came fully into focus, wearing a blue Miami riptide hat that reminded him of her bright eyes. Her skin glistened from exertion and her tank top clung to her curves. Her cheeks were flushed a perfect shade of pink. He swallowed back the fire that built inside whenever he was in her presence, another rarity. Sure, he was a guy who felt an attraction to beautiful women, but she was different. In front of him, yet somehow out of reach. She wasn't like the other women who typically threw themselves at him. She was definitely unique. "Well, hello neighbor," he said, stopping in front of her. She looked like she wanted to dart past, but the way her blue eyes sparkled as they drifted over him suggested she struggled with her own desire. His wide stance took up all of the hard-packed sand between the waterline and the fluffy, powdery sand, which he saved for his early morning runs before the heat of the day took hold. Her brows formed an inverted V as though she was not pleased to see him, or at least tried to convince herself as much, because there was no denying her body reacted when she was around him. "Neighbor," she spat, but at the same time, she inhaled sharply then coughed. She turned away from him, coughing and clutching her throat. A ring glinted on the fourth finger of her right hand. Strange, he hadn't even noticed that she was engaged. Maybe that was what had set her off. Then again, why would she have asked him out if she was already in a relationship? "Billie," he said, nearing her. "Are you okay?" Her cheeks were red and her eyes watered. She tried to swallow, then started coughing again. "I think a bug went down the wrong pipe," she rasped. "Can I get you anything?" Concern laced his voice. "Some water." He eyed the ocean. They were on the edge of town, away from the shops and the Shake Shack on the other end of the beach. A mansion Rhodes had been avoiding since he'd arrived loomed on the other side of the narrow road that ran parallel to the water, Mansion Mile. She continued to cough. "Come on, I know the person who lives there. We can get you something to drink." He gestured to one of the mansions. Her shoulders were rounded as she continued to sputter a cough every few moments. He wrapped his arm around her back to support her as she walked. Something black and lacy stuck to her shirt like Velcro. It must have happened in the clothes dryer from static cling. It appeared as if a pair of her underwear got stuck to the clingy athletic fabric of her shirt. He tried not to smile. He knew she'd be okay once she got a drink of water, but there was no sense in embarrassing her when she was already having a tough time. Rhodes caught her beachy coconut and vanilla scent and breathed deep despite his better judgment. She stumbled in the sand as her body shuddered with another harsh cough. He gripped her waist and suddenly felt an itch inside, being so close to her. However, it wasn't something he could easily, or ever, scratch. Especially not if she said no. And especially because Rhodes was perpetually single by choice. He dated but didn't want to end up like his father, at least not in the relationship department. What Martin Rhodes lacked in love, he made up for in business sense. When Rhodes was a little boy, his father asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. His response: "I want to be just like you, Daddy." He'd since made an amendment to that declaration, hence being a long-time bachelor. However, he'd show his father he was as capable when it came to investing in and building winning properties. Billie lost her footing as they rose up over the dunes and he caught her small frame, keeping her from falling, but she shrugged him off. "I swallowed a bug. I didn't break a leg." Even though she was irritable with him, an overwhelming and inexplicable desire washed through him like a warm wave. With her pink cheeks and pleasingly plump lips, he wanted to see her smile. Just once. At that thought, a grin rose to his lips and then just as quickly fell away when they reached the gate to the mansion. Rhodes drew a deep breath and pressed a series of numbers on the keypad. To his surprise, it opened. "Know the owners well?" Billie asked around another cough. "You could say that." But the code was just a guess. He'd never been to that particular mansion, but to another up north, and she'd used the same code, a combination of his sister and his birthdays. He steeled himself as he rapped on the door. A housekeeper answered and blinked a few times. "Well, there's no denying family resemblance is strong," she muttered. She showed them into a sitting room where a massive painting hung over a cold fireplace. It depicted a man that may as well have been the spitting image of Rhodes, well, in a few years. In his mid-30s, Rhodes's hair was still dark brown while his grandfather in the painting had started to go white around the temples. Billie gazed from it to him, then back to the painting on the canvas. He didn't explain because he wasn't sure where to start. His family matters were a tangled mess that no one ever talked about. What did the cat drag in? Or should I say the sharks? A familiar voice said from down the hall. Rhodes's grandmother came into view. Always a woman of style and grace, even if just alone at home, she wore a floral blouse and coordinating slacks. Diamond studs shone on her ears and she had a thick gold necklace around her neck. Rhodes bent down to give her a kiss on the cheek. "Hi, Mama." "Don't hi, Mama me. Give me a proper hug, young man." Her slight southern accent warmed. By that, he understood he was forgiven for not visiting sooner, at least for the time being. She'd probably have something to say about it later. Mama was clever. He wrapped her small, frail frame in a hug. Then again, Mama's seeming forgiveness may have something to do with the fact that he brought a guest, not that the women seemed to know each other. The Bishops may have been forthcoming with their private matters, but the Thorpes, on his mother's side, guarded their affairs with their lives. Billie coughed again and her eyes were wide as she took in her surroundings. The mansion was a plethora of marble, polished antiques, and old money opulence. "I see you brought a companion," Mama said. Her eyes flew to Billie's finger where the small stone glinted. Billie quickly tucked her hands behind her back. Rhodes, my only grandson, why didn't you tell me? Memaw caressed Billie's cheek. She stood there, unmoving. She's beautiful. Keep looking after your skin, dear. Be sure to wear sunblock and look both ways before crossing the street. It's getting a bit wild here in Blue Bay Beach. Not like when I was a girl. She smiled warmly. Rhodes introduced them. We'll soon be family, so you can call me Memaw. Billie coughed. She needs water, Memaw pointed out. We were out for a run and she swallowed a bug, Rhodes explained. The housekeeper must have been nearby and gleaned as much because before Rhodes could find his way to the kitchen, she appeared with a tray and 2 tall glasses of water. Billie practically downed the whole thing in one long gulp. She took a deep breath. That is much better. Thank you. She didn't spare him a glance. Mr. S. Thorpe, you mentioned you've been coming here to Blue Bay Beach since you were a little girl. She nodded. Rhodes's brow wrinkled. He practically knew Mamaw's life story and had never heard of Blue Bay Beach until he received word that she'd bought up the mansion property. According to his father, the town was a veritable gold mine. After setting up shop with the intention of developing the land, he was delaying announcing it to his grandmother until it was a sure thing, just in case she'd become attached to the house. I have some old photos you might like, Billie said. That would be wonderful, dear. He noticed her voice was shaky and she wasn't as strong on her feet as she'd been when he'd last seen her, which he realized hadn't been for quite a while. Rhodes took a long sip of his water and caught Billie's eyes abruptly jerk away as though she'd been watching him and liked what she saw. He smiled inwardly. Let's have a seat, Memaw. He led them into the nearest sitting room. Well, this is such a surprise. Are you staying at the inn in town? Memaw asked. Had I known, I would have made up rooms for the 2 of you. Now, tell me all your plans. Billie's eyes were still wide. Rhodes stammered. Come on. I want to hear all about the wedding. I knew I'd live to see this day. Memaw beamed and patted Rhodes on the knee as he lowered into the chair beside her. He brushed his hand over his face in dismay.
Chapter 5. Billie. Billie took off her baseball hat and smoothed her hair, afraid it was a frizzy mess from the run. She'd never been in one of the vast estates on Mansion Mile and slowly settled onto the silk sofa embroidered with faint pink and yellow cherry blossoms. The ceiling was high, making Billie feel small. And what appeared to be a painting of Rhodes in about 10 years hung over a massive hearth. The genes on his mother's side must have been strong, Mama certainly had character. To say the mansion was grand was an understatement. Having just barely recovered from the agony and embarrassment of swallowing then choking on a fly, to say she was having a slight crisis was an equally large understatement. She wasn't sure where to put her hands or what Mrs. Thorpe meant about wedding plans. Maybe she mistook her for Rhodes's girlfriend? Fiancé? He sat beside her, taking up space, robbing the room of air, and heating it at least 100 degrees even though the house had climate control. The sun had set, lowering the temperature to a modest Floridian summer evening of about 80, but beside Rhodes, her skin was hot all over. All right, let's hear all about it, kids. Mama crowed. I'm so excited. I'd been praying you'd find true love, Rhodesy. Billie, usually comfortable with herself and in her environment, felt as out of place as a dolphin in a china shop. They could easily do as much damage as a bull. And it seemed the damage, or mistake about the ring on her finger, had been done. Rhodes's grandmother looked so hopeful as she sat tall and proper in a chair that matched the sofa while waiting to hear the wonderful, but fake news about their pending union. He was the last person she'd ever say I do to. It was more like I don't. She didn't like the way he took over a room, or town, like he owned the place. She didn't like his business of paving resorts over perfectly good places. She didn't like that he'd witnessed her nearly choke to death on a fly. She didn't like that he'd helped her. She didn't like his cocky smile. She sighed. Okay, maybe she liked his smile a little bit. There was just something so alluring about his lips. But that wasn't the point. Rhodes's eyes flicked to her. It's unlikely Scarlett will marry, so you have no idea how pleased I am to know at least one of my grandbabies will get a happily ever after. You know that Rhodes, your grandfather and namesake, was a wonderful man and would be so thrilled to see you happy at last. It's not like that, he started to say. Like what? Mama asked. Tell me what it's like. I do love living vicariously. There's a mini-series on the Hallmark Channel. She went on to describe her favorite show set in a small mountain town. I watch it too, Billie confessed. Rhodes shifted uncomfortably beside her as though he might catch cooties from the mushy description of romance. I think Tracy and August should get together. They make the perfect couple, Billie said, referring to the show. I think they'll get their happy ending for sure, Mama confirmed. She had a faint southern accent. Don't keep me in suspense any longer. Tell me all about your happy ending. No, wait. This is just the beginning. Mama had all the enthusiasm of a teen girl with her first crush. Billie bit the inside of her cheek. Rhodes gazed at his hands, hanging between his knees as he leaned forward with his elbows resting on them. When they'd arrived at the house, Billie had thought that maybe the old woman was senile, but she was focused, alert, and gave no signs that she was confused or mistook Billie's identity. The room was uncomfortably silent, so Billie said, I grew up here, in Blue Bay Beach. Rhodes and I met here, actually. I own the Coconut Cove Café. I'm surprised I haven't seen you there. Mama lit up. I don't get out much these days, but the Canasta gals and I order a pie when we play cards, and Esther, the housekeeper, gets takeaway for me once a week. Wait. Hold on, Billie said. Let me guess. Your order is the Reuben sandwich with extra pickles and 3 servings of bimini bread. Yes. That's me. I freeze the bread and eat a slice with my tea every morning. How rude of me. Where are my manners? Would you like to stay for dinner? Esther can make you something. No, no. We don't want to be any trouble, Mama, Rhodes said politely. A jolt ran through Billie at the word we, as if he were referring to them actually being a couple. In fact, we should get going, he said. Billie jolted again. Are you okay, dear? Mama asked. Billie reached for the water. I'm fine. If you won't join me for dinner, stay a little longer. I still want to hear the exciting story of your courtship and all about your wedding plans. Billie cleared her throat, trying to steer them out of awkward territory and maybe focus the target on Rhodes. You mentioned you've been coming here since you were a girl. I'd love to hear more about that. My father, Frank Fisher, came here in 1951 and never left. Frank Fisher is your father? Oh my. She blushed. He opened the restaurant. Forgive me for not making the connection. He was quite the catch. I always envied Priscilla. What about Papa? Rhodes asked, aghast. I envied her before I met your grandfather. Mama straightened a bit and delved into her memory, recounting stories of bonfires on the beach, dances, and even a tale about a drag race. Clearly, she was as sharp as a tack. The stories carried Billie into the past when she was a girl and her father would reminisce. In many ways, Mama reminded her of Betty. But tears sprung to her eyes because as much as Frank liked to take trips down memory lane, it always upset him to think about the love he'd lost. So much so that he'd work extra long hours to distract himself from his pain. You will definitely have to show me the old photos sometime. Who knows, I may be in one of them. Mama's smile doubled. Rhodes's jaw tightened and he cut Billie a look she couldn't read. Mama leaned in. Rhodes Sr., your grandfather, would have loved it here. I think he's happy, looking down at me content in my little house, puttering around in the garden, having the girls over for canasta, and falling asleep to the soft sound of waves. You just never know, one of these days I won't wake up, but I'll have lived a good life. Even more so now that I know you met a lovely young lady, Rhodesy. She turned to Billie. Now, dear, tell me more about how my grandson proposed. He's always been rather big for his britches and I'd like to hear about how he softened up. Billie opened and closed her mouth, unable to think quickly enough to explain. Rhodes leaned back on the sofa and extended his legs as though getting comfortable and settling in for the story. The older woman leaned in, eager. Billie wouldn't lie, but also didn't want to disappoint Mrs. Thorpe. Mama. It's not like that, Rhodes said at last. Then tell me what it's like, Rhodes. I want to hear all about how you met. When you proposed. The whole kit and caboodle. Her words were slightly clipped as though her patience was wearing thin. He cleared his throat. Like Billie said, we met at the restaurant. She wasn't sure what to say next, so she simply told the truth. Actually, I asked him on a date. Rhodes turned toward her a measure and his eyebrow lifted. You didn't ask me, you wrote it on the order slip. Same thing, Billie said. Not really. Speaking and writing are two very different mediums. Fine, but it was because my coworkers dared me to. Billie pressed her lips together. And you didn't want to. Mama's eyes widened as though intrigued by the potential drama. Not really. I mean, don't get me wrong, Rhodes is a decent-looking guy, successful by some people's estimates, but... He turned sharply to Billie. Decent-looking? Really? You think I'm just decent-looking? Apparently, he knew he was devastatingly handsome, but wasn't willing to say as much. Just like his grandfather, Mama said. Billie played with a loose string on her tank top. Yeah. I mean, you're fit, tan, take care of yourself. Her eyes slowly lifted to meet his. They were smoldering. Burning into her. Daring her to admit that she thought he was more than just decent looking. She hated that he knew that about her and about himself. Because the truth was. Fine, you're the most handsome guy I have ever seen. There's depth to your eyes, a hidden sadness and vulnerability that scares me because I'd like to believe that you're just superficial, just chasing money. It's easier to put you in that box. But you surprised me by defying my expectations. Your lips terrify me because they're just so perfect. And something happens to my body chemistry every time I hear that growly, smoky voice of yours. She couldn't believe she said all of that out loud and in front of Mrs. Thorpe no less. Her cheeks heated. Mama leaned back, pressed her hand to her chest, and said, "Oh, my. This is better than my mini-series." Rhodes shot Billie a look. "Don't mind me. Carry on." "Rhodes, what do you think of Billie? You know, it's really best to get all of this out before you walk down the aisle. To tell the truth about how you really feel. In fact, the pastor in town offers premarital counseling if you're interested." Rhodes got to his feet and crossed his arms in front of his chest. "What do I think of Billie?" He rubbed his chin. "To start, when I first saw her, I thought she was cute, and then I realized that she's pretty, which makes her beautiful. She has intelligent, sparkling, knowing eyes that I can't stop thinking about. But she's just a bit too feisty for her own good." "What was it you said?" Mama, about me being too big for my britches. Well, Billie is too. Takes one to know one. But at the same time, she's very short. His expression was of smug victory. Billie sprung to her feet and folded her arms across her chest. I am not short. I'm of average height. They stood in front of the fireplace, facing off. He glared down at her, but beyond that, she saw something in his eyes she wanted to draw out. She wanted to make them light up. She wanted to see them blaze like a fire in the hearth. Nonetheless, Billie squared her shoulders, not backing down. Mama sighed. Your grandfather was afraid of his feelings too, at first. Over time, he softened. Rhodes, take a seat, please. You too, Billie. They did as ordered. I see that you're both very passionate individuals. It's normal to have mixed feelings, but you see, it's the differences you see in each other that will help balance you out. To temper the flame, as it were. Now, I'd like you to take each other's hands. Rhodes tilted his head at an I don't think so degree. Mama cast a glare that made Billie scramble for his fingers. She nudged her chin as if to suggest, let's just indulge your grandmother and get this over with. He adjusted his position on the couch and they faced each other, holding hands. Billie's were cold, but he warmed them. His grip was tight at first but then lightened. Likely because her hands looked so small next to his, like if he held on too tight, he could snap her bones. Each of you take a deep breath. Then when you exhale, look into each other's eyes. Mama's voice was gentle yet commanding. Billie could hardly tear her gaze from his hands, but she felt his searing into her and lifted her chin. Her eyes were drawn down to his lips, but she pulled them up when Mama insisted they hold eye contact. Rhodes's chest rose and fell as if he'd only just then stopped running. Billie took shallow little sips of air because her heart was racing ahead. Staring into his eyes like that was arresting and made her feel vulnerable. Again, she wanted to look away. He seemed to want to do the same, but Mama swatted him lightly, reminding him to focus. You've done a lot of outstanding things in your life, young man, it shouldn't be too much to ask to gaze longingly into your fiancé's eyes. He breathed a long exhale then returned his focus to Billie's blue eyes. As a minute or more ticked by, a thrill worked its way into Billie's belly. She tried to ignore it, and when that didn't work, she tried to resist it. But it was insistent as it swirled around and around, like riding a roller coaster. It swooped and dove, rose and fell. Her lips parted and she swallowed hard as the sensation grew in intensity as they continued to hold eye contact. She wasn't lying when she said his voice did something to her, but it was also him looking at her, seeing her. She felt something big shifting inside, making room, opening up. A slight tremble started on Rhodes's lip as though he was going through a kind of alchemical shift as well. Soon, the corners of his lips lifted. Billie fought against leaning in, looking more carefully at his mouth. Another minute passed and what had seemed agonizing softened into something else. Not quite comfort, but something warm, fuzzy, intimate. She started to feel curious and wonder what Rhodes looked like when he woke up in the morning. Did he have any pets? What did he like to do on Friday nights? What amazing things had he done in his life that his grandmother had mentioned? What were his dreams and goals besides taking over Blue Bay Beach and replacing it with a replica? More time passed and his grip on her hand suddenly tightened as though instead of wanting the moment to end, he held fast to it. Another shot of warmth rushed through Billie and her eyes felt wet. She blinked a few times. Rhodes's gaze softened and his eyes misted over. It was like they stared into each other's souls. She swallowed hard, afraid of what was happening to her, to them. Everything around her faded. It was just the two of them. His strong jaw and stubble. His lips. his eyes, his touch. And all of that was focused solely on her. Rhodes plus Billie equaled something more. We. Us. She felt a connection she'd never felt before, not to any man, not to anyone. She felt seen, safe, protected, adored. Rhodes's lashes were thick and his eyes were dark, but not shadowed. They were brown and full of depth and kindness that she hadn't quite seen before. He drew her in. She leaned forward toward him ever so slightly. If just looking at each other and holding hands was so intense, what would it be like to kiss him? Now, tell me how you feel about each other. Mama's voice slammed Billie back to reality. Rhodes dropped her hands.
Chapter 6. Rhodes. Neither Billie nor Rhodes answered Mama's question. The truth was he didn't know how he felt other than overwhelmed by a sensation that threatened to burst out of his chest. It had a name, but he couldn't speak it. He'd never felt it before and worried she didn't feel the same. He'd heard about love at first sight. Maybe it was love at 4 minutes of intense, continued sight. You can start by saying, I feel. Go on. Give it a try, Mama said when neither Billie nor Rhodes came forward with their feelings. I feel less animosity, Billie muttered. What was that, dear? I couldn't hear you. Mama cupped her hand around her ear. I feel animated, she said, recovering quickly. Rhodes had not foreseen his grandmother making the mistake that they were actually together and then meddling in what was hardly a relationship. He should have corrected her, but now that it had gone on, he wasn't sure how to explain without letting her down. However, something had passed between him and Billie. Perhaps what she meant by less animosity was the same thing he felt for her, just phrased differently. Or maybe the best way was just to be direct and explain before things got out of hand. When it came to business, he had no problem saying what he really thought, stating his desires and demands. But like the word love, an explanation didn't pass his lips. Deep down, he wanted it to be true but wasn't sure Billie shared his feelings or if he could ever risk revealing them. Mama, there's something you should know about Billie and me, he said, forging ahead. Billie swallowed as though relieved he was going to confess the truth. Billie and I, Mama said, correcting his grammar. What I want to know is when you plan on getting married. I need a date. Have you set one? Please make sure it's after July 1st, but before September 21st. Why before the end of September? He asked, thrown off. I'll be lucky to live through another summer, Rhodes. But she smiled warmly. Deep furrows formed on his brow. Please don't talk like that. I'm on gravy time, as your grandfather used to say. She gazed wistfully at the painting of the original Rhodes, the patriarch of the family. The three of them had been close. Rhodes had basically been raised by his grandparents. That's where he'd learned what his father refused to teach him, even though he was a successful businessman. Rhodes never understood it, but his own father had kept his distance after the divorce and wasn't overly friendly or fatherly to him. Martin Bishop didn't show him the ropes. He'd never placed his hand on Rhodes's shoulder and said, "Son, someday, this will all be yours." Even without his parents' divorce, his father was distant and often cold. It's set for August 14th. 6 months after Valentine's Day, when Rhodes proposed, Billie blurted. Oh, that's only a couple of weeks after the gala. Perfect, Mama said before he could correct either of them. Billie, we'll have to get you a gown for our premier, annual event. Rhodes ignored his confusion and what appeared to be Billie's change of heart. Yeah. We figured that it would be a small ceremony. Just a few people on my side and of course, Mama, you're welcome to come. We don't want to make a fuss, he said, playing along. You only get married once, well, unless you're Martin Bishop, Mama said. You should make a big fuss. Listen, I want you to do whatever you kids like. Make it grand, lavish, memorable. It's my treat. She leaned closer to Billie. I know your parents are gone, so I'd like to do this for you. It would make me very happy. She glanced at the ring on Billie's hand, then clapped hers together. This is a wonderful day. What a surprise. My only grandson has been in town, hadn't visited me because he was busy falling in love, and then shows up with the best news ever. She hurried down the hall. I will be right back, she called. What are you doing? Rhodes hissed at Billie when Memaw was out of earshot. I could ask you the same question. What kind of grandson doesn't visit his grandmother while in the town that she clearly loves and he plans to demolish? The truth was he'd been avoiding visiting Memaw because he knew she wouldn't like his latest venture. One question, August 14th. Valentine's Day. That was two questions. I thought you were going along with it, she whisper-shouted. Her breath danced over his cheek, reminding him of easily the most intimate moments of his life when they'd gazed into each other's eyes. Whatever animosity was between them, the long-held stare had diffused it and gave way to a deep spark he'd never before felt for anyone. Rhodes was a single man, living his best life. Not someone to be tied down by marriage. Then why had their irritation with each other returned and why didn't he correct Memaw? Rhodes got to his feet but felt like he was on shaky, uncertain ground. He started pacing to find his stride, his strut, and the thing that made Rhodes Bishop a bigger man than most, other than his actual height. I didn't mean to go along with it, he finally answered. You hesitated. Just now. What took you so long to answer? She got to her feet and met him in front of the fireplace, blocking his path. I did not hesitate. Then why didn't you correct her? Billie's coconut scent forced him to take a steadying breath. Why didn't you? He asked. She's not my Memaw. Billie fought a smile as she said the family name aloud. If you must know, my younger sister started it. Memaw, like my ma. We were closer to our grandmother than our own mother when growing up. He didn't like his defensive tone. Why and how had Billie worked her way into his life? Under his skin? Into his heart? How many of you are there? She asked. There's just one of me, sweetheart. Her hands flew to her hips. Sweetheart. He flashed his cockiest smirk, returning to familiar territory where he had the upper hand. Isn't one of me enough or can you not handle me? I meant how many bishops, but I can certainly handle you, Rhodes. She squared off in front of him, lifting onto her toes. I don't think you can. Their eyes met. Is that a challenge? Her voice raised over a whisper and he watched her lips as she punctuated each word with determination. He bit back the desire that had swept through him periodically since they'd met and especially when they were gazing into each other's eyes. I can certainly handle you, Rhodes. But can you handle me? He almost laughed. All 5 feet of you. 5 feet 5. Almost. He was right about her height. She lifted higher on her toes as though stretching to meet him. Oh, he could handle her for sure. His feelings for her were another matter. But he knew just how to disarm her too. He reached for her while wiggling his fingers, then worked them across her neck, then down by her ribs. She writhed away, giggling as he tickled her. He chased after her as she circled the sofa. They were standing at opposite ends, sizing each other up, waiting for the other to show signs of movement left or right. He feinted right and he cut her off, but she was quick and she rounded to the back of the piece of furniture. Once more, they faced off. Your tactic is to tickle me, she asked, out of breath. That's just stage 1. Her eyes went wide. Well, you'll have to catch me. She started toward the door. But he dove over the couch, capturing her, and they both fell back onto the cushions. He had her in his clutches and started tickling her again. Laughter erupted from Billie and her smile reached her eyes. It was a cheap move to force her smile and laughter, but so was his grandmother's attempt to force intimacy between them by insisting on a staring contest. But as he slowed his attack and she settled next to him, catching her breath, he rather liked the feel of her warmth so close, conforming to his side. Maybe his grandmother's ploy wasn't cheap. Risky, intense, and unusual, but not at all cheap. Perhaps she saw something between them that they both refused to admit. It was something he knew, deep down, was true. Rhodes liked a stubborn, headstrong, beautiful woman named Billie Fisher, and that was going to be a problem because actually, he feared it was more than like. She must have felt it too because she didn't move. Leaning against the corner of the sofa, she was nestled alongside him in the crook of his arm. They were face to face. Her eyes floated to his. His dipped to her lips, then back to her shining blue eyes. They stayed that way a long time, once more staring at each other as though they both knew words brought them conflict, but their other senses, sight, touch, smell, brought them calm, accord, together. His breathing slowed. Hers fell into sync. The corners of his lips lifted. Hers followed to reveal her magnificent smile. His grew even wider. "This is unexpected," she whispered. "Definitely." But what this was, he wasn't entirely sure other than that it had happened, a shift, a deepening. All he knew was that it felt good. It felt right. He didn't want it to end. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "I have one idea." Then he leaned in. She smelled like summer. She was like sunshine. She was feisty and he liked it. She certainly could handle him. But could he handle her? Just as his lips were about to brush hers, Mama's shoes clicked down the hall. "Found it," she called. "I had to go into the safe and open years' worth of old treasures, but this one is the best of all." Rather sheepishly, they both straightened on the sofa. Billie smoothed the loose pieces of her hair. "I prayed and knew the good Lord would bless me during this lifetime to see you married, Rhodes." She passed him a velvet box. "Now, this ring has a wonderful story." Mama settled on the chair opposite them. Billie was seated close enough to Rhodes that the outsides of their thighs were touching. She didn't shift away. The small box burned in Rhodes's hand. Sweat, and not from horsing around, dotted his brow as if he were nervous and was actually going to propose. "Don't get me wrong, the ring you got her was lovely, but you're a Thorpe and we can do better." Mama winked. "Oh, actually, this was just temporary." Billie shook her head and slipped the thin ring from her finger. "I just wore it symbolically." He'd have to ask about that later. Mama pointed to the box in Rhodes's hand. "That ring was the first one Rhodes Sr. used to propose to me. We were in the south of France. It was a beautiful evening and we strolled along the Riviera. Hyacinth and the buttery smell of pastry scented the air. A man was playing the violin and there was a group of plein art painters capturing the sunset." She closed her eyes in reverie. The picture she was painting brought a smile to Billie's lips. The sight drew him in more than his grandmother's story, though he was enjoying that too. "I've never left Florida," Billie said. "Well, there's a first for everything. Rhodes will do something about that, won't you, dear? You guys get to plan your honeymoon. Although Blue Bay Beach is a paradise, so I understand why you'd never want to leave." An edge entered Mama's voice at her last sentence, as though she knew what had brought Rhodes to town. He nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. How had Billie never left Florida? He suddenly wanted to show her the world. "Where was I?" Mama asked absently. "Ah, yes. We stopped by a beautiful vista to watch the sunset." His arm was on my shoulder and he turned to me and said, "I know we've only known each other for a week, but I feel like I've known you my entire life." I never forgot those words because of what he said next. Tears pricked her eyes. Rhodes reached for her hand. "I'll never forget. Your grandfather said, if I make it out of here alive, I'd like to spend the rest of my life getting to know you." And he did. He kept that promise. Billie sniffled. "You see, we were both overseas during the war. I was a nurse and he was in the army. Anyway, I said yes, and he slipped the ring on my finger. Then I threw my arms around him in a hug and Mama's hand flew over her mouth. I still don't know how it happened. The ring went flying into the ocean." "This ring?" Rhodes asked, pointing to the box. Mama nodded. "That very one." We were both stunned, shocked, and searched for it in the growing darkness. She shook her head. Not long after, we were both called back to our duties. A year and a month passed. The war was over. I didn't know if he'd lived or died. But we'd made an agreement to meet at that same spot if and when the time came. Sure enough, he showed up one day. The day before I was to return to the States. We rushed into each other's arms and he presented me with a second ring. She pointed to the one on her finger. I remember, I was shaking. I just couldn't believe it. We took a seat in the sand and talked for hours. It was a hot, sunny day, so eventually, we waded into the water to cool off. Billie's jaw lowered as though she knew what was coming. I saw something sparkling. Sure enough, the ring turned up too. When something is meant to be, it has a way of working out. Mama beamed. Wow. You never told me that story, Rhodes said. You've never been engaged. Billie smiled. That is better than any miniseries plotline. Thank you for sharing it. Memo nodded. Now, go ahead. I want you to do it properly. Do what? Rhodes asked. We'll go to the garden. It's probably safer than the beach. Wouldn't want to lose that thing again. Billie's eyes widened with alarm as Memo swept to the large double French doors leading to her garden and ushered them outside. Landscape lighting illuminated what by day he knew was her magnificent collection of blooms. Rhodes stood there dumbly as Billie exited onto the slate terrace. It's lovely back here. She turned in a circle. Oh, just a little something I do in my spare time. You'll have to come back during the day soon to see it in all its splendor. Now, I thought you kids had somewhere to be, keeping you from joining me for dinner. Let's get on with it. I'm getting hungry. Rhodes stammered. Your grandfather didn't get down on his knee the first time, but he did the second time when he pledged his life to me. Nerves exploded inside Rhodes. Was she really making him do it? Or was he willing and that's why he hadn't objected? Was Billie open to the crazy notion? Were they hypnotized by Mama's eye contact game and her magical story? Whatever it was drew him over to Billie like a tractor beam. Or maybe it was her magnetism. There was likely some scientific explanation. Chemistry. Biology. Alchemy. Something. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about her since they'd met. He stepped closer to her, gripping the box. He took a deep breath, glanced through the window to the painting of his grandfather, to his grandmother, then back to Billie. It was strange, but there was something about that moment that felt more right, more certain, than any other in his life. They stood toe to toe. She lifted her chin and he dipped his head. He met those sparkling, beautiful eyes of hers. I know this is unusual, unconventional, but Billie, will you do me the honor of marrying me? He asked. Then as though compelled, he opened the box. Her eyes never left his. There was a question between them, but his answer was in his actions. Was it crazy? Yes. Was it rash? Sure. Did he mean it? Absolutely. His eyes must have said as much because hers lit up. She took his hands in hers and said, Yes, Rhodes. Yes, I'll marry you.
Chapter 7. Billie. It was true that Billie Fisher had never left Florida. She didn't go to college. She'd had few experiences outside the ones provided by working at, then owning, a restaurant. But that was not to say she was dumb, naive, or sheltered. But as she and Rhodes walked back toward town after saying goodbye to Mama, she felt a little punch-drunk. The waves rolled softly to one side of Mansion Mile. A gentle breeze rustled the palm fronds overhead. The loose sand on the road crunched under their sneakers. It was an ordinary night, but something extraordinary had happened. Billie felt elated, joyful, certain. She wasn't sure she liked Rhodes, but something unusual, deep, and inexplicable had passed between them that resulted in a feeling inside her that transcended like. And she had a ring on her finger to prove it. Passing under a streetlight, she studied how it sparkled. Mesmerized, she let out a contented sigh much like the one that had escaped after she'd surrendered to Rhodes's tickle attack. There was a moment afterward when they'd been slouched on the sofa, side by side. He'd turned to her. Their lips had nearly connected. But maybe a kiss wasn't necessary because they'd connected in an unbelievable, unexpected, and even deeper way. The pair were silent as they continued, either both still under an enchanted spell of wonder and shock or not quite sure what to say. Billie was equally divided between both. As they entered the town proper with its low buildings and strings of lights in the trees, a certain trepidation started to worm its way into Billie's mind. Her steps slowed as they neared the sandy shore inn. "Can I walk you home?" Rhodes asked. "Aren't you staying here?" she asked, pointing at the white building with a wide front porch. "No, I rented a house over on Cormorant Place while I'm in town. I'm on Egret. Opposite direction." She pointed. "Well," he said. "Well," she repeated. She couldn't help it, but she extended her hand and admired the ring. Well, maybe we should get to know each other, he suggested. Considering, he gestured to her hand. Well, I suppose that's not a bad idea. Do you know anywhere I can get a bite to eat at this hour? His stomach grumbled. It seems like Blue Bay Beach closes up shop pretty early. It's Sunday, she said as if that was explanation enough. His attention turned to a weathered wooden sign. Maybe somewhere with casual dining that serves breakfast, lunch, and dinner like Coconut Cove Café. Too bad they're not open. They have delicious bimini bread. I happen to know that a really cute waitress works there too. Cute, she asked. I call her cutie, but she's more like beautiful. Billie's cheeks flared. I wouldn't mind having dinner with her there. Her lips quirked. Yeah, I know the place. In fact, I own it. So, my fiancé is a proud business owner. Good to know. By the way, sorry about thinking that you were a guy. Happens all the time. She gave him a forgiving smile. Do you bake the bimini bread as well, making you a baker? She nodded. I wear many hats. Also, it's a secret family recipe. As far as I'm concerned, it's a delicious family recipe and you look good in that hat, though I can't say I'm a fan of the riptide. He jiggled the brim of her hat. She ignored the comment about her favorite football team because once more, Rhodes was heating up the space between them. Are you saying you like my bimini bread? Because if so, I can overlook the "I'm not a fan of the riptide" comment. I really do like your bimini bread. He leaned back, resting his forearms on the rail at the end of the dock. The smile he wore was all kinds of flirty. Her belly lifted and rolled like the waves on the nearby shore. You've only had it a few times. He shrugged as if quantity didn't matter so much as quality. I might be addicted. Then you have a problem. Her pulse quickened at the intensity of his gaze, lingering on her, eating her up like she was a slice of bimini bread fresh out of the oven. It was different than the long-held eye contact at Mrs. Thorpe's and ignited a different but powerful sensation inside of her. I might have a problem. But if so, there are worse ones to have, Rhodes said. At the word problem, a sudden vision flashed before Billie's eyes of the restaurant and the town at her back gone, and in its place the Sand Dollar Resort. In all its quaint sleepiness, Blue Bay Beach was real, it was her reality, and the resort was a replica, a fake. It was like cold water splashed her. I have a problem too. It's you, Rhodes. He tilted back as though the words were a blow to his large frame. Then he straightened. Come on, don't talk to your fiancé like that. Rhodes, we're enemies. This is all fake. She waved her finger between them and the ring caught in the low light. Confusion flickered across his features. But you said yes. How was I supposed to say no? She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing the vision of the possible future hadn't interrupted the magic that was exploding between them, but she had to face reality. No way was she going to be lured into thinking anything between them could work, even though a big part of her wanted it to. How were you supposed to say no? He repeated. Like this. He leaned in, closing the space between them. His hands landed on her jaw as he moved in slow motion, like he wanted to give her a moment to anticipate his mouth meeting hers, and what a kiss from him would be like. It was like he gave her time to say no. But she didn't. Her eyes closed and she let him kiss her. It became all sensation, touch, smell, taste, sound. His lips were softer yet stronger than she imagined. They were demanding yet generous. He was a giant of a man yet tender at the same time. He alternated between little pecks and deeper, more intense kisses that tasted like peppermint and were somehow sweet. They were like a nibble of a cookie and the whole thing. It was like dipping her toes in and diving in. There was the promise and the fulfillment. The yearning for more and the delivery. It was a drop of the ocean and the entire expanse. Feelings, big and small, flooded her body. She wanted more, and Rhodes gave it as his hands moved to the space just behind her arms, drawing her closer. One moved to her spine and the other shifted to cradle the back of her head. He kissed her with meaning and purpose. With tenderness and devotion. With like and love. She hadn't seen that coming when he'd sat down at her counter that first time. Their foreheads tapped together as he pulled back for a moment, meeting her eyes. "You can still say no," he breathed. She didn't want to. She wanted to shout yes, but instead, she lifted her chin and kissed him back, because maybe for them words were dangerous, false, but action told the truth. Her pulse raced and she could feel the thundering of the heart he hid in his chest, under his brawny, tough businessman persona. Warmth spread between them as they clasped hands, as she pressed him against the dock rail, as her lips crashed against his, demanding more. The waves crested in her stomach, rising like a tsunami, about to flood the village. At the reminder of her town, she lowered onto her feet. He was breathing hard. She closed her eyes, trying, once more, to wipe away the vision of Blue Bay Beach decimated as she stood at the foot of the dock. It was like a crossroads. "Are you good at everything you do?" she asked, hoping his answer was no. Despite being the suit, maybe he was a terrible businessman and the deal would fall through. He grunted at the same time his stomach growled, reminding her of her own hunger. "Come on. You saved me from choking to death. I'll save you from starving. Then we go back to being rivals." As she flipped on the lights inside Coconut Cove Café, an idea appeared. It could have been the mystery or chemistry of attraction between two people, the moments she and Rhodes had shared at Mama's, her stories, or something else entirely, but hope flickered inside like the starlight glistening off the water in the distance. Perhaps if she showed him what Blue Bay Beach was like, things would work out. Engaged rivals, he called to her. The ring sparkled in the dim light. She needed a moment to think and she did her best thinking on a full stomach. Good thing she was at the restaurant.
Chapter 8. Rhodes. Without a word, Billie disappeared into the kitchen of the Coconut Cove Café. Rhodes found the washroom to freshen up, then as he wandered back down the hall toward the main dining area, he paused in front of numerous photographs. The first group depicted the town in the 1950s, then moved through time until the early 2000s. It was like watching a slideshow as the area grew, but somehow preserved the small town, old-time charm. There was even a mint green Chevy, circa the 50s, in both the early and more recent shots. As Rhodes continued down what must have been Billie's family's memory lane, he came to a couple labeled Frank and Priscilla. Once again, they aged as the town grew. There were photos of them with famous singers and celebrities who must have been guests at the cafe over the years. Then came a man holding a baby. The mother, Priscilla, was not in any of the images after that. The man beamed at the little girl as she grew, but a sadness snuffed out the light that had been present in his eyes in earlier shots. Rhodes shook his head, wondering what tragedy had befallen the Fisher family. Before he reached the most recent photos, footsteps approached. "Trying to figure me out?" Billie asked, holding two plates containing sandwiches and piled with chips. "That's just it. I can't figure you out, Billie," he said, following her into the dining room. "You go from warm to cool, then cold, then warm, then hot, now cold again." He moved his finger in the air as if to keep track of her many moods. "What made you soften all of a sudden, then harden and then soften again?" "My father was a very forgiving man and I try my best to be like him," she said simply. She set the plates on either side of a small table by the window, then sat down. "I figured since your grandmother likes a Reuben sandwich, you would too. Also, don't blame me if it's terrible. I'm not renowned for my cooking skills." Starved, Rhodes sunk his teeth into the sandwich. He may not have been able to figure Billie out, but she was definitely an amazing cook despite her comment. It was the best, most delicious sandwich he'd ever eaten, and that wasn't because he was so hungry. Don't tell Mama, he said around a mouthful. Best Reuben ever. Why shouldn't I tell her? You heard her say that she orders one every week. She used to make them for me when I was growing up. I claimed hers were the best. You've got her beat. Billy forced away a smile that he was desperate to see. She had the kind of smile that was like endless summers, like warm sunshine. It made him want to kiss her again. Maybe after he had a mint or piece of gum. She hardly touched her meal. So what are we going to do about the fact that we're rivals? Engaged rivals, he repeated. She rolled her eyes. We live on opposite ends of the town you're bent on leveling to the ground. I hardly think this ring will change that. He wiped his mouth with a napkin. I guess I do see that being a problem. He'd meant it as a joke because he intended to show Billy how amazing the resort would be, how it would bring jobs and revitalize the area. A major problem, Rhodes. Also, you're a Miami Riptide fan, he said, shaking his head with mock disdain. She tipped her hat, then waved her hand at his shirt. And you like the loser Bruisers? He pointed at his shirt with the Boston Bruisers football team logo. I'm originally from Massachusetts. It's practically a birthright. Oh, so you're from one of those old money families like the Kennedys or something like that. But what would you know? You've never left Florida. Her eyebrows lowered. I'll pretend that you didn't mean that as an insult. I meant it as a joke. If we were to get married and the resort gets built, we can travel the world. She shook her head slowly. Does Memo know about your grand plans? What's going to happen to her house, or rather, mansion? Rhodes shifted in his seat because he hadn't quite gotten to that part of the plan yet. In fact, he detoured from the plan, the map, or whatever it was that he'd used to successfully guide himself through all of his previous business transactions. Since arriving in Blue Bay Beach, or more accurately since meeting Billy, he felt lost, adrift, unsure. Rhodes could not afford uncertainty. Not when so much money was at stake. Not when he was finally going to make his father proud. At the same time, he wanted to see where the thing with him and Billy might go. He felt like there could be a future for them, he just wasn't sure how. What are we going to do, Rhodes? She asked as though reading his thoughts. I don't know. Sometimes they say opposites attract, or the stormiest relationships are also the most passionate ones. Oh, come on. Please. You go from wanting to tear down my restaurant to asking me to marry you to wanting to dine at my restaurant. Just because you're rich doesn't mean you can have whatever you want. No, you're right. He gazed out the window, then at Billy. Their eyes locked. If it were daytime, they'd match the surrounding water. He didn't mind being lost in her. No, not one bit. But here's the thing. I'm not sure what I want. Part of the truth escaped his lips. It was a risk, he knew, but so was the kiss that had blown his world apart and confirmed his feelings for her. That's a surprise because you stomped into town pretty clear about what you wanted. Seeing Mema, he said vaguely. She softened you to Blue Bay Beach. He shrugged. Or you could give in to the Billionaire. Until he figured out a plan, he'd stick with the original course of action. Billy squawked a laugh. What's the offer? Well, we're already engaged. We are not engaged. His eyes drifted to her right hand. You said yes. You haven't taken off the ring. She shifted her gaze to the sea, but she didn't deny the truth with a response. I'm using it as collateral. The spark between them was undeniable, despite what she said or didn't say. It's beautiful on you, he murmured. He felt caught in a trap, unsure how to resolve things and create a win-win situation for everyone in business. That was what his grandfather had taught him. But whatever was going on between them wasn't business. It wasn't a game. He didn't know what it was other than maybe, just maybe, something real. But it was as though neither one of them wanted to admit it. She admired the shiny band and glistening stone on the ring. But you do realize how ridiculous this is, she said with a bit of what sounded like apprehension in her voice. Much better than the fake one. Why were you wearing an engagement ring anyway? She sighed. I guess to keep from people getting the wrong idea. Which was? That I was available. Before I started wearing it, I'd get asked out all the time. No big surprise there. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean by that? He didn't need a guidebook for what he knew was absolutely true, what was plain to his eyes. Because you're beautiful. Big blue eyes. Your smile. That adorable little tooth there on the side. My crooked tooth. Her tongue grazed over it. It's less crooked than you think. It's adorable. Your eyebrows are very expressive. Your cheeks are very kissable. Oh, and your lips. He smiled and his eyelids lowered. You have a laid-back, but ticklish look about you. Any guy would be nuts not to ask you out. Any guy would be nuts to ask me to marry him. Count me as crazy. Rhodes chuckled. If that's what you think, then why, when we were at your grandmother's, did you criticize me for being short, feisty, and what was it? Too big for my britches. Her mouth twisted. His lips quirked. I needed to know if I could tell you how I really feel. Is it that big a risk? Big guys have farther to fall. Are you teasing me about my height again? It's not my fault you're a giant. She flung her arms in front of her chest. I'm only 6'5", Rhodes said. That means you only have 12 inches on me. So back to the ring. I saw some photos of your parents. Wouldn't they have wanted to see you get married? Her eyes clouded over. They'd want to see me happy. Rhodes opened and closed his mouth, not sure what to say first. Are you unhappy? No. Focusing on the restaurant makes me happy. But love can come at a cost. What cost is that? He leaned in, curious about what she was going to say. How much it can hurt if the other person is suddenly gone. Sadness rippled over her features. Do you mean your mother? His voice was soft, gentle. She sniffled as if the tears were still quick to come even if it had been years since whatever tragedy had befallen the Fisher family. I had just turned 1. My mother was driving home from Miami with friends. They'd been celebrating a birthday or something. An oncoming car swerved into the wrong lane and hit them. None of the women survived, but the drunk driver of the other car did. Rhodes got to his feet and took her into his arms. She clung to him like she needed a life raft. He wanted to melt her sadness, to shore her up, and protect her from the lingering pain. She clung to him for a while longer, then pulled away, wiping her eyes. In the end, my father forgave the man. She shook her head, then cleared their plates. Billie took a few minutes to clean up and collect herself while he waited by the door, thinking about love and marriage, hurt and forgiveness. After she locked up, she said, "You asked a personal question. My turn. Mema said something suggesting your father and mother are no longer married. Sadly, there's no redemption to be found there. As wonderful as Mema and Papa were, my parents were quite the opposite. I'm hoping it skips a generation. There's that saying that something like hope is not a plan of action. You can't hope to have a good relationship. It takes honesty and hard work. You're right. Good thing I'm not averse to either." He paused a beat. My mother only had Scarlett and myself. My parents had a bitter, bitter divorce. My father went on to marry again and again. He's had upwards of 7, maybe 9, wives. Who knows? I've lost track. Rhodes did not mask the disgust in his voice. Sounds like you're not a fan of marriage. They reached the end of the dock and he walked beside her in the direction, at least he assumed, of Egret Street. Yet, I asked you to marry me. Your grandmother's talk about mortality pressured you to pop the question. The truth was right there on his tongue, but he wasn't entirely sure Billie returned or had warmed to the sentiment despite the proposal and explosive kiss. He revealed another fact instead. My father is not a fan of me. Never has been. He never took to Scarlett either. Whether I was just an annoying kid or overeager teenager trying to please him, I'm not sure, but he's always kept a distance from me. Yet, you followed in his footsteps as an investor and resort developer. Right then he followed her steps because he wasn't exactly sure where they were in that section of town with all the streets named after birds. All he knew was that his cottage was on Cormorant. Yeah. I guess. Rhodes brushed his hand down his face. I guess I feel like I had something to prove because I wasn't good enough for his attention. So much truth had been drawn out of him that night, he wasn't sure what was left. You shouldn't have to earn your father's love. No. That's not how it works. He took a breath to release the bitterness in his mouth. She was right, but he couldn't reconcile it. He wanted to have a better relationship with Martin Bishop. "Why did you go through with the proposal?" she asked. "Maybe I thought we could prove something to each other. Maybe because I like you. Maybe because I want to escape. I am no paradise, Rhodes. And like I said, love doesn't need to prove itself. It just is. Says the woman who challenged me to whether or not I can handle her. Why didn't you warn me?" She paused on the sidewalk. "Why did you say yes?" he countered. "Because I'm a good liar. I don't believe you." She harumphed and turned away from him to face a modest craftsman-style beach cottage with gray shingles. It was in dire need of paint, the lawn had gone to seed, and the fence was missing some slats. And here we are again, at another impasse. She crossed to the other side of the gate. "And my house. Maybe we just need to figure out what we both want." "Well, that's..." She stopped herself as though realizing he was right. "Yeah. Oh, and for the record, I hate Valentine's Day." It occurred to him that he wanted to change that. The sparks between them, whether caused by hate or love, practically lit up the night. "Don't lose the ring," he said. "We have to tell your grandmother the truth." "Which one?" he asked vaguely, not sure what it was anymore. "I guess we should figure it out. But we should tell her we're enemies." "Are we?" Silence spread between them and pressed against the darkness. "Yeah, we could tell her and dash all her dreams." He was beyond conflicted. "Whose dreams?" she asked. Rhodes wasn't sure what he wanted, but his gut, his heart, and his brain were telling him who. She glanced at the ring on her finger. "What are we going to tell people?" "We're not." His tone was flat, commanding. She nodded, going along with it and thinking on the spot. "We're going to delay the wedding because of something. Because you and your wrecking balls are going to destroy my town and my business. Irreconcilable differences. It just won't happen. Your grandmother will live past September and she'll understand." Everything about what Billie said was like a collection of slivers in his feet, hands, and chest. She thrust her shoulders back and lifted her chin as though she'd resolved her internal conflict. He wasn't the kind of man who gave up when he'd set his sights on something: a resort, property, or as it turned out, a woman. Everything about Billie, from her smile and beyond, was irresistible. It was almost worth lying to his grandmother. How was he going to get out of it? Or how were they going to go on with it? He had no idea, but would figure it out, just as soon as he got up the courage to tell her how he really felt. "You know, we make a good team, bouncing ideas off each other and coming up with solutions like this," he said. "I'd hardly call this an alliance." She snorted. "But we're engaged. We could form one. How about you go on a date with me? A proper one." She glanced at her watch. "I have to get up in 4 hours and be back at the restaurant." "Well, there's always the gala." He winked and started to walk away. "By the way, the ring fits you perfectly."
Chapter 9. Billie. Billie hadn't pulled an all-nighter since her father was sick, but it didn't look like she was going to get any shut-eye after the long, strange, and okay, she'd admit it, at times wonderful evening spent with Rhodes. Never mind the fact that the rock on her finger was like a lighthouse with its own beacon, blinking for her attention or to warn her she was in troubled waters. His grandfather must have had old money for sure to have been able to afford a ring like that while he was serving in the war. Either that or the ocean returned a different treasure. In fact, the style of the band reminded her of a cresting wave the way it curved into the stone. She slipped it off and turned it over. On the backside were the initials BR. She didn't know Mama's first name but assumed it started with the letter B. Her husband was Rhodes Thorpe. Definitely sounded like old money. Billie laid in bed, giving into wakefulness as she reviewed the day from choking on a fly to Rhodes's parting words. "The ring fits you perfectly." But what was imperfect was the situation. They were rivals. They were at odds. They wanted vastly different things. Oh, and never mind the fact that when he'd started tickling her, she discovered a pair of her underwear had stuck to the fabric of her athletic tank top like Velcro, probably from the laundry. How she'd run from her house along the beach then have a dreadful coughing fit with it remained attached was a mystery. Had he seen it? She only discovered it once inside the mansion, because of course, she'd show up at a mansion with a pair of underwear clinging to her shirt. Thankfully, it was clean and, well, small, so she easily tucked it in the band of her pants to spare herself further embarrassment. But it didn't matter because her cheeks pretty much remained pink from when she and Rhodes had met on the beach to when they'd parted. It wasn't the way he looked in his running gear. Hot. It wasn't his voice. Mesmerizing. It wasn't his lips. Drool-worthy. It wasn't his eyes. Honest. It was everything about him. She'd seen different sides of Rhodes throughout the evening, from how sweet he was with Mama, to the staring contest, to the proposal, to dinner. Billie was torn, conflicted, confused. She couldn't come up with one thing she didn't love or hate about him. There was no middle road. There was no making sense of how quickly and completely she'd fallen in. No. She wouldn't think it. She wouldn't admit it. But she sure did feel it. And it was never part of the plan. Whatever the plan was, other than run the restaurant, anything more with Rhodes went against the plan. She loved her freedom and never saw herself as the sort to settle down. Love just complicated things and ultimately led to loss. She couldn't bear that. Her father had barely survived it, and considering he died of a heart condition, she was certain it was because his heart was broken. As the sky paled with the dawn, Billie's eyes finally drooped with sleep, but she forced herself to take a cool shower and get dressed for the day ahead. As she walked to the restaurant and the night flashed in her mind, along with the vision of the resort in its place, she told herself it was just like any other day. She'd pop the bimini bread in the oven. She'd make coffee. She'd meet Alvin, Elmer, and the other regulars. Just a regular day at the office, she murmured as she neared the entrance to the restaurant. A bouquet of flowers in sunset shades of yellow, orange and pale pink that were as tall as the door handle blocked her path. Oh, my. Billie brought the arrangement inside and set them on the table by the entrance. Mercifully, the morning was as normal as they came until Isley showed up for her shift. Several times, Billie caught Isley giving her a quick second glance or a long side eye as though she wanted to say something but held back. "What's up?" Billie finally asked during the lull. They sipped pina colada smoothies. Is Ford in the doghouse and trying to make an apology, or is he actually the sweetest guy on the planet? What do you mean? Isley asked. The flowers. Isley tilted her head then shook it. Her gaze drifted to Billie's right hand. She forgot to change out the ring and discreetly tucked it behind her back. So Ford isn't in the doghouse. But he's building one for the rescue dog we're going to get at the end of the summer. Sweetest guy on the planet, Billie confirmed. Actually. Once more, Isley's gaze drifted to Billie's hand. My mother mentioned that one of the women in her canasta club had great news and couldn't wait to share, so she called late last night. Oh, really? What's her name? Babs Thorpe. Billie knew what was coming, but also learned that the B on the ring stood for Babs, probably short for Barbara. Did she mention that what brought me to her house was the fact that I was choking on a fly, or that I had a pair of underwear static clinging to my shirt? Billie asked. Or that you were with the guy who comes in here and flirts with you like it's his job and oozes flirtatiousness, the muscly one that smells like wealth. The others call him the Suit, but I call him Dreamboat. He also happens to be Babs's grandson. The very same person who asked you to marry him. Dreamboat? Billie stuck out her tongue. Also, he does not flirt with me. He flirts with his eyes. He flirts so hard. He also intends to replace our town with a resort. That's his actual job. Correction. His job is wooing you. I'm not the type to be wooed. Billie stacked a few cups and fussed with the supplies in front of her. Well, he sure wants to give it a shot. Isley passed her a small white envelope. This was nestled in with the flowers. Billie tossed Isley an aggrieved look, then opened the card. For my fiancé, who loves Valentine's Day even though she has a hard time describing her feelings. XO, the suit. She let out a long sigh that would easily have been identified as a swoony sound had the cook not called an order from the window. The unexpected delivery that Monday morning made Billie undeniably gooey inside. She'd never gotten a bouquet of flowers or a love note. The following day she received a box of chocolates that was as big as a pizza. The day after that it was a window box with herbs. The note said, "For my fiancé, who loves cooking almost as much as I love eating the food she makes." XO, the suit. The gooiness turned into something thick, syrupy. He was trying to woo her all right. Thursday, she received a bouquet of donuts, and on Friday a large box tied with a blue ribbon was delivered to the cafe. The card attached to it said, "For my fiancé, don't open until you get home. I'll be out of town until next weekend. See you then." XO, the suit. Billie wasn't sure what Rhodes's angle was, but she marched over to the temporary office on the edge of the proposed site for the resort, which was the whole town. The flowers hadn't yet wilted, but she threw them down as she entered his office. She tossed what was left of the box of chocolates on the desk. She'd have brought the donuts, but the girls at the cafe ate them all and Betty insisted on keeping the planter with the herbs. As it was, her arms had been full, so she wasn't able to carry the newest box. "Hello. I was just leaving." Rhodes reached to embrace her like they were an actual couple. "Now everyone knows that I'm fraternizing with the enemy." She scowled. "Are we fraternizing?" "Don't tell Mama. She's very devout. Strict about things like that before marriage." "As a matter of fact, I am too." Billie huffed. Amusement played in Rhodes's eyes. "Am I really the enemy?" "If you're intending to build this monstrosity," she pointed at an easel propping up a tasteful painting of the resort. "Then yes. Let me prove that I'm not the enemy." She'd listen if he proved it to her with his lips. Then she shook her head hard, hoping to cast the intrusive thought out to sea. "Okay, don't build your resort. Go on a date with me," he said. She folded her arms in front of her chest. Rhodes looked dashing in a dark blue suit, his masculine watch, and the light scruff on his face. Despite his handsome good looks, drawing her into his clutches, she said, "No. Well, we can't let down Mama. We have to go to the gala. You'll even get to meet my family. I was under the impression you don't like your parents." "Oh, I don't. Are you introducing me to them to punish me?" He chuckled. "You did say I was the enemy." "Where have you been all week?" she asked. "Busy. Too busy to visit your so-called fiancé." Clearing the calendar. "August 14th isn't that far off, our big day when we tie the knot." He flashed his cocky smile. She prickled because he seemed to really enjoy teasing her. "It's less than a month away. Do you think we can learn to tolerate each other in that amount of time? What, and become friends? Or more?" "I am not marrying you, Rhodes Bishop." He hitched a grin. "I beg to differ. You still have the ring on your finger." Her nostrils flared. Her jaw tensed. Her fists clenched. No, he wasn't trying to woo her. He was trying to best her. To wear her down so she'd roll over and give him the deed to the restaurant property. Trepidation gave way to irritation. "Wait just a minute. She stabbed the air with her finger as she approached him. It all became clear. You put Mama up to that whole thing. You tried to get me to marry you so you'd have rights to my property, so you could get a hold of my restaurant and bring a wrecking ball to expand your empire. No, but Mama helped pick out the latest gift. She really likes you. She's a lovely woman, but, Billie said, feeling slightly disarmed. So are you. He crossed the room and braced her with his massive hands. The weight of his grasp seemed to steady her, but she wouldn't have been able to get away if she wanted to. He was like an anchor, holding her fast, but if she were to leave the shore, where would she go? She didn't have an answer for that either. Rhodes dipped his head and met her eyes. All of the above. False. Marry you someday? True. He leaned in and kissed her. Again, she let him because woo her or outdo her, there was no denying that Billie had fallen for Rhodes Bishop. She returned home in a bit of a gummy-kneed daze. She went over to the office to give him an earful and instead had fallen into his arms. Coconut Cove Café and Blue Bay Beach didn't stand a chance if she gave in so easily. As the following week passed with him absent and out of town, she talked herself into going to the gala, but once there, she'd out Rhodes and tell everyone, including Mama, the truth.
Chapter 10. Rhodes. After a long week spent in meetings, facing a surprising amount of opposition, and at risk of shelling out more money than he ever had before, Rhodes stood outside Billie's house. He'd hired a crew to get started fixing things, but she'd sent them away. She certainly didn't make things easy, but he'd never gone for easy. He preferred a challenge. Except the situation between them was more than that. Much more. He knocked on the door and Betty answered. "Oh, dear, your chariot awaits," she sing-songed. From behind a door on the far side of the small house, he heard the murmuring of several voices he'd come to recognize as the girls from the restaurant, Claudia and Isley. "It's too fancy." That was definitely Billie. "You look gorgeous," Claudia said. "I can't pull this off." Definitely Billie. "Stop moving, you're going to smudge the makeup," Claudia hissed. "But I look like a confection." Billie groaned. "You look like a babe." That was only something Isley would say. A mermaid babe who's going to marry a billionaire. "I am not going to," Billie started. Rhodes strode across the room and threw open the door as Betty protested. "You can't see her before." Billie, quickly picking up on the conversation, said, "It's not like it's our wedding day." "Not yet." His smirk bloomed into a full-on smile. "You look gorgeous. A mermaid babe going to a gala." The dress he'd commissioned for her had threads that matched her eyes with other shades of blue and seafoam green. Mema helped with the cut and fit, tight at the top with thin straps and loose and flowy on the bottom. The fabric was almost gauzy and moved like waves in the ocean. She was a dream. He held out his elbow. "Ready." Billie turned to her two friends who each nodded, then Betty, who still stood in the living room. "Dear, this isn't like playing dress-up. You look like a real-life mermaid princess." Tears flooded the older woman's eyes as she held the camera away after snapping a few photos. "In fact, I'd say you look more like a queen," Rhodes said. Betty smiled at Rhodes, possibly for the first time. "You got that right." "Thanks, you guys, but I'm more beachy and less fancy." Billie shifted from foot to foot. "Not tonight." Isley whistled. "Will you be my queen for the evening?" He wanted to add, "My queen everlasting." That was the kind of poetry on his heart, but he didn't think she was ready to hear that, considering she was clearly uncomfortable with the gown. And he wasn't entirely sure he was ready to make such proclamations. He drove them in his sleek black sports car, leaving Blue Bay Beach for the waterfront venue a few towns south. Billie arranged her dress and smoothed the skirt, then ran her fingers through the beachy waves in her hair. "You know how you felt it necessary to remind me that I've never been out of Florida before? I'm sorry about that. Sometimes my ego gets the better of me. I'll say." She snorted. "Well, I've never been to a gala either. This is going to sound stupid and I will make you pay if you dare embarrass me, but what is a gala? What am I supposed to do?" Rhodes's lips quirked as he made a turn. The only reason I've ever teased you is that I like the way you look when your cheeks are flushed. Mostly though because when you realize you're red all over, you smile. You like my smile? Her fingers wandered to her lips. His hand reached hers in the darkness and he kissed her knuckles. Billie, I like all of you. More than like. How is that possible? We've hardly known each other for much more than a month. Remember Mama's story, he hinted. Yeah, but that was during wartime. We've been fighting our own battle and sometimes you just know with someone. He shrugged. Yet you're intent on taking over my town and introduce me to your parents who you clearly don't like. I thought by meeting them you'll get a better understanding of me. As for the gala, it's a big party where everyone gets dressed up to network and crow about their successes, at least insofar as my father is involved. Sometimes it's also for a fundraiser, like in this case. He avoided answering the question about the resort. I didn't know you were altruistic. Oh, I'm very generous. What's the cause? She asked. It's the premier event in the nation to raise money to support people with Down syndrome. It's very near and dear to Mama. Her organization has raised the most contributions from private donors and this year we even have a major corporate donor. Wow. That's impressive. Well, so is my sister. You mean Scarlett? She asked. What I'm really looking forward to tonight is you meeting her. She'll be the guest of honor. As usual, the gala was madness as the valets moved cars and limo services dropped off guests. He left his keys with the former and helped Billie out of the car. Billie and Rhodes ascended the long, wide outdoor staircase into the venue. The building glowed from within and with all of Mama's talk about dying in September, he wondered if it would be the last event she hosted. He made a note to get the details to carry on the legacy. It took ages to get inside, during which countless people greeted him and Billie. They also asked about the resort. Numerous women, including some he dated and others who wanted to date him, greeted him with hugs and kisses on the cheek with the intention to linger too long. He only had eyes for one woman and she had sparkling blue eyes that matched her dress. She wasn't like the others who'd pursued him for wealth and status. She wasn't like the ones he'd hooked up with because he'd felt like it. Billie was hard-working and pretty. Honest and clever. She was a woman like no other. Nonetheless, with the continued fawning and false flattery from the other women, she seemed to shrink, but he gripped her hand tightly, deflecting questions with vague answers and keeping his attention on her. When they finally reached Rhodes's parents, who stood at opposite ends of the line like he was being made to choose which one to greet first, Mama appeared. She wrapped Billie in a hug. I'm so glad you came. Dear, you look beautiful and my Rhodesy looks happy, which makes me happy. A short young woman with dark hair and eyes the same color as Rhodes's eyes walked slowly toward them. She wore a red gown and a wide smile. Memo extended her hand. Scarlett, this is Billie, the special person I wanted you to meet. It's so nice to meet you, Billie said warmly. You too. Scarlett smiled and looked Billie over carefully, then her gaze landed on her brother. He smiled wide and wrapped her in a bear hug. Careful, my dress, Scarlett said as he let her go. You look beautiful, sis. Are you having a good time? Now that you're here. Mom and Dad won't talk to me. Memo narrowed her eyes. Rhodes tossed his hand in their direction. Who needs them? The fun is right here. He signaled between their small group. That's right. Scarlett clapped her hands together. Brother and sister swapped some inside jokes and Memo leaned in toward Billie, talking in a semi-hushed tone. But he could still hear them, maybe on purpose. I'm not joking when I say you've made Rhodes happy. He went from avoiding me because of his silly quest to prove his worth to his father to visiting me every day, asking me about love, and all manner or romantic things. He imagined Billie making a face of disbelief. I didn't really do anything. You said yes to possibility. He's a cunning businessman and has done very well for himself. But sometimes I think he works too hard. He tries to go bigger, better, or he tries to escape. Escape what? He's a billionaire by my count. Indeed. But there's one thing money cannot buy. His father has tried 9 times. Mema clicked her tongue in disapproval. Oh, my. Can't wait to meet him. Billie's voice dripped with sarcasm. You seem like a rare kind of woman, Billie. The kind of woman who can handle Rhodes. She exhaled and turned back to him and Scarlett. Well, we have to mingle, but we're all seated at a table together. Oh, and Billy, I still want that bimini bread you promised and to see those old photos. Mema winked. The truth was, Rhodes couldn't handle keeping his eyes off Billy's mouth, dressed up in red lipstick like a bow. Or the contour of her outline in the dress, the soft waves of her hair, or her bright eyes. Mercifully, Rhodes didn't have to interact with his mother or father until the meal was served. Unfortunately, his mother laid into him about how he wasn't around nearly enough and if he decided whether or not he was going to fund her new clothing line. She was actually asking if he would foot the bill for her latest plastic surgery. His father avoided the conversation altogether, which was both disappointing and a relief since he didn't want to talk about the resort right then. If the gala had been the month before, he would have crowed about the acquisition and the plans. Instead, he listened to his father boast about his latest investment property in Argentina. Meanwhile, his wife, apparently a makeup artist and around Billy's age, which meant she was only a couple of years younger than Rhodes, chattered enthusiastically to Billy about how flawless her skin was. Billy repeatedly tried to get Scarlett in on the conversation, but it was as if his sister was invisible to wife number 9. So, Billy is it? Funny, I have a cousin Billy, but he prefers to go by William. Tell us what you do. Rhodes's mother asked after the servers cleared their plates. Billy simultaneously stiffened as though irritated and shifted as though uncomfortable. I own a restaurant in Blue Bay Beach. Is it Coconut Cove Café? Billy brightened. Have you heard of it? It's the one my son is replacing with something classier. The former Mrs. Bishop flashed a plastic smile. That's right. Seek and destroy, Martin Bishop said. Rhodes's jaw muscles and shoulders tensed. Funny, I think that's the biggest compliment you've ever paid me and it's about ruining my fiancé's restaurant. Rhodes's mother scoffed. I thought this is all for show, to appease my mother before she dies. Billy's mouth fell open. Mom, she's wearing Mama's ring. Rhodes's mother cut Billy a glare and her eyes flared with anger. The ring she wouldn't give me. Rhodes's own anger brimmed to the surface, but before he could say anything, Mema tapped the microphone at the podium on the stage. She thanked everyone for attending and for their generosity, then explained about Down syndrome along with the support and tools the donations would serve to benefit people living with the chromosomal condition. We've recently partnered with Chromoverse, a company that helps people understand their ancestry, genetics, and provides reports on health. The findings are fascinating and will help us better understand Down syndrome and the future of those in our families living with it. They've offered to fund several centers to serve women like my darling granddaughter Scarlett for education, advocacy, and more. But here's the fun part. They offered us 3 kits. After this presentation, you have the opportunity to connect with representatives from their company to have your ancestry tested. It's easy, painless, and I'm sure fascinating. In the meantime, will my grandchildren Scarlett and Rhodes please come up? The representative from Chromoverse is going to share our results. He had forgotten the test he'd done at home months ago that would detail whether he was French like his mother claimed or German as his father insisted. He hated leaving Billy alone with his parents and squeezed her shoulder as he got up. Everyone clapped as they took to the stage. Rhodes read his line first. Chromoverse stresses the importance of family and to quote part of their mission statement, roots grow underground, but emerge into the light of who we are. And no matter what our backgrounds, we're all connected, Scarlett added, reading from the paper on the podium. Thank you for the opportunity, Chromoverse. Now, for the big reveal. Memo extended her arms around her grandchildren's backs as they turned to view the large screen on the wall that showed pie charts along with other details outlining the heritage of Memo, Scarlett, and Rhodes. A hush fell across the room when it became clear that he and his sister had different fathers.
Chapter 11. Billy. The guests at the gala were too polite to heckle the family, but there were a few gasps. The graphics on the screen illustrated that Mama was Scarlett and Rhodes's maternal grandmother, but that his father was not Martin Bishop. Billy got to her feet, not thinking but intending to rush over to Rhodes. His mother and father each gave her a long look of appraisal, eyeing her up and down like she was a few inches too short and a few dollars too poor to be worthy of Rhodes or to even be at the gala. She didn't care. At least she truly loved him. With a dismissive wave, a chair skidded across the floor as Martin threw his napkin on the table and glared at his ex-wife. It was as though the news took a minute or two to register. "I knew it. I knew he wasn't my son." The man seethed as he exited the room. Billy's attention shot to Rhodes, still standing on the stage as though glued there. Mama cleared her throat. "Well, apparently the chromoverse tests are extensive and regretfully accurate." Her southern accent came on strong. "You knew?" Rhodes asked. "I hoped. There's no way you're related to a man like Martin." Mama's lips puckered as though her former son-in-law was as bitter as a lemon. Scarlett's face fell because Martin was still Scarlett's father. Mama realized her error. "I'm sorry, Scarlett. Luckily you have your brother, me, and let's talk about this later." She ushered them both from the stage and returned to the podium to continue emceeing the event. Rhodes gave Scarlett a hug and talked to her a minute before she met with her group of friends. He strode toward the banquet table where Billy stood and stopped in front of his mother. "Tell me the truth. Did you know?" His mother gave a slight nod but didn't meet his eyes as though mortified. "I didn't want to be a single mother." Tension rolled off Rhodes as he clenched and unclenched his fists. Then he rushed outside. Billy hurried after him, across the black granite floor flecked with gold, through the wide glass doors, and into the fresh night air. He paced along a balcony that led to the parking lot on one side and the expanse of ocean on the other. He muttered to himself using coarse words. Billy wasn't sure what to do. Did he need to cool off or did he need someone to help with his frustration and anger? He took off his suit jacket and draped it over the rail. Then he leaned over it, bracing himself on the cool metal. Billy took a chance and rubbed his back. The strong, roped muscles underneath eventually softened and he let out a long breath. "That's why he's always treated me like." Rhodes shook his head. In the distance, ocean waves crashed and the moon snuck behind high clouds. He suddenly turned his back to the sea as if the only view worth looking at was Billy. His gaze relaxed. Heat spread across her skin like summer lightning. He seemed to forget his animosity, at least temporarily. "I need to get out of here." "I understand. Listen, if there's anything I can do, please don't hesitate. I'm sure this is quite a shock." Her words felt inadequate. "I'll get a car home. Good night, Rhodes, and I'm sorry for everything that happened." His gaze jerked to her. "No, you're coming with me." Her heart stuttered. Rhodes went back inside to make sure Scarlett was okay and reported back that Mama had everything under control. Thank God for Mama. They got in the car and Rhodes was quiet until they neared the exit that led to the long road into Blue Bay Beach. "Do you want to talk about it?" Billy asked. "No." Mansion Mile came into view. She'd glimpsed the lives of the wealthy and the women in towering heels and flawless makeup, the world where Rhodes belonged. He parked in front of her shambling house. She moved to open her door. "Wait." She lifted her eyebrows. He exhaled. "That was a disaster. I'm sorry you had to witness it. Me and hundreds of other people." She truly was sorry. It must have been devastating and confusing. His phone beeped as if on cue. A woman's name flashed on the screen. Samantha. They'd met during what seemed like the endless meet and greet where Billy had felt completely out of place. "You can answer that if you need to," she said. He propped his elbow on the ledge of the window and the edge of his hand rested against his mouth as though he was deep in thought. "What I need is you, Billy." Ripples raced through her belly. "I'm not the kind of woman you're used to." "And what kind is that?" "Like Samantha and all the others." Fancy, proper, well-heeled. I like laughing with my mouth open, I've hiccuped in public, and have been known to cry at commercials with adorable puppies. The edge of a smirk peeked out from under his hand. Sounds like my kind of woman. I own a restaurant that's barely scraping by. I work long hours. My house is falling apart. I'm not the refined, glamorous, tall woman you're looking for. Who said I was looking? Something inside of her fell, like a shingle off a roof. Her expression in the half-light from the moon and the street lamps must have revealed as much. I didn't mean it like that. Sometimes, when we're not looking, we're pleasantly surprised by what shows up in our lives. Sometimes you don't realize you were missing something until it appears. I'm not a fanciful flavor of the week. No, you most certainly are not. Your reputation, your lifestyle, your height. I just don't fit, Rhodes. Sometimes I'm sarcastic. I give people free meals if it looks like they haven't had a warm one in a while. And if I'm not working, I rarely wear shoes. It sounds like you're telling me all the reasons we're wrong for each other. How about I share my list of why I think we're right? Her breath caught. That was not what she expected to hear. You do lead a different life, but it's one I might want to ease into. I like the cafe, that you work hard, and have a big heart. His eyes raked over her. I also like your pretty eyes, your pretty nose, and your pretty lips. His fingers grazed the skin on her cheek. If she weren't feeling so vulnerable, she would have kissed him. And you can't help that you're short. He flashed a cocky grin. Average height, she corrected. I'm kidding, but there might even be some things that I love about you, Billie. A pleasant warmth filled her chest, but at the same time, her mouth went dry. I'm not looking for love. He had so much going on, not to mention letting things between them go farther was the ultimate betrayal to everything her parents had built and to her town. Yet the yearning did not go away. You make it sound like a hardship. Love can lead to loss. You've mentioned. But we can't think that love only has to be difficult. Do you know that for sure? First hand, she asked. Second hand. Mama and Papa. A giggle escaped. What? You still can't get over what we call our grandparents? I told you that Scarlett started it. I just followed along. I'm glad you got to meet her. Me too. But you don't seem like the kind of guy who follows along. You seem to make up the rules or break them. His mouth dropped open as though aghast. Name a rule I've broken. Associating with me. The enemy. Tell me more about this so-called enemy. Amusement played on his lips. For instance, is the name Billie short for something? What's your full name? No, you'll laugh at me. Like how you laughed at me calling my grandmother Mama. You have to admit it sounds hilarious coming out of your mouth. My mouth? What kind of mouth is that? Heat lit up her cheeks. A demanding one. A commanding one. A perfect one. Also, a big one. You'll laugh louder at me than I did at you. Try me. I can be nice. That was true. The last weeks with him were nice at times, if she tried to ignore what he stood for, which she couldn't. At least not entirely. Come on. Fine. Billie is short for Wilhelmina. My full name is Wilhelmina Joanna Fisher or just Billie. To his credit, he didn't make a peep. The kids used to always tease me because my name was Rhodes. I won't even revive the things they'd say. I doubt anyone ever teased you. I was scrawny until I was about 13, so yeah. He scratched the scruff on his angular jawline. I wonder who my real father is. My life just got turned upside down, but you're the only thing about it that's still right side up. I'm not looking forward to talking to my mother, but Papa used to say, you catch more flies with honey. I think of myself as being pretty good at getting what I want. His gaze lingered on Billie. Are you saying I'm a fly? She wrinkled her nose. He laughed a deep, rich laugh. No, quite the opposite, but I didn't earn my way to billions by accident. So you're using your business strategies with me. That was exactly what she was afraid of, what she feared to be true. He got out of the car and opened her door, lifting her to her feet. No, Billie, I needed to learn a new skill set. And what's that? How not to mix business with pleasure. He led her over to the rickety porch. She hoped he didn't fall through because the slats were rotten. I was saying about how love can be easy. It's hang-ups and expectations and dishonesty that can make relationships hard. I think it's a matter of getting out of your own way and telling the ego to take the back seat. Do you now? Is this first-hand experience or second? It's observation. I've never been in love. Not really. With you, I don't feel any of the negatives that I mentioned. I feel something wonderful. It's just us. I saw how love is easy, second-hand with my grandparents. They'd dance on the porch together to their song every night. He flipped on his phone and tapped the screen a few times. The old classic Unchained Melody by the Everly Brothers came on. Rhodes gripped Billie's hand, then drew her right up against him before positioning his palm on her waist. He held the other up and she twined her fingers with his. He started swaying side to side before they moved in a slow circle. But I feel it, I feel love, first-hand with you. His words were a risk, a whisper. She wasn't sure she could accept them, let them in. She was afraid to return them even though her heart beat out a demand that she speak the truth and allow him into her life. As the song played in the background, she melted against him, unable to resist, at least at that moment. Her knees felt weak, but he held her up, held her close. She gripped him tightly in return. It was like they were both supporting the other, but soon it was like they were weightless, floating on the front porch. She felt a lift in her heart of possibility, promise. However, she knew all the reasons that things wouldn't work between them were waiting for her on the other end of the song, in the silence. They swayed together, moving slowly. Billie wanted to extend that moment so she didn't have to face the reality of their differences. When the song ended, Rhodes didn't let her go. He just held her close as though feeling the same way. When Papa got sick, they'd sit together in their rocking chairs on the front porch, holding hands, rocking back and forth. But then it ended. Billie wiped her eyes. Love can be easy, he said, holding her arms and meeting her eyes. Being with you has been a special kind of lesson. Being here with you is paradise. She shook her head. The word paradise brought back the argument in her head. What about Blue Bay Beach? What about us? He asked. She wanted to say yes, but couldn't turn her back on all that she fought to uphold, the town built by local families. The coast's best-kept secret. Community. Her home and connection to her parents. She'd have to move. She'd have to say goodbye. If he went forward with the resort. Let me adore you, lavish you with nice things, a nice life, Billie. Don't you see? She asked. My life is nice. I like it here. You should go. We just have different views on things. I don't think this is going to work. It was too complicated and came with too many uncertainties. Rhodes flinched, then recovered, straightening his tie. Is that really how you feel? She could do little more than nod because her chin was trembling and tears were rushing toward her eyes. His jaw tensed. You're probably right. I'll probably just end up like my father, or the guy who I thought was my father. I have to go, she said when he didn't move to leave. At that, she fled into the house. Closing the door behind her, she slid down until she was seated on the floor. She held back her sadness until the slats on the porch creaked as Rhodes walked away.
Chapter 12. Rhodes. Rhodes drove to the cottage on Cormorant that he'd rented, but before he cut the engine, he continued on, not wanting to be alone with his thoughts. His phone beeped and showed another message from Samantha and a couple from a woman named Liz. He didn't have to be alone, but the only person he wanted was Billie. He fought to empty his mind, but couldn't. It raced with thoughts about his family, Billie, and his future. He sped through town, trying to outrun them, but when he reached the beach near the proposed site for the resort, he got out and rushed to the water's edge. Rhodes kicked off his shoes and let the water wash his feet. Did Billie really think there was no way for them to be together? To make it work? He'd struggled with it but believed the connection they shared, one he'd never felt with a woman before, was stronger than their objections. Even though he wasn't Martin Bishop's son, perhaps he was just as bad, throwing away towns and eventually marriages. He plunked down in the sand and hung his head in his hands. Shame led to misery, misery led to anger, anger led to sadness. How had things gone so wrong so quickly? 1 minute he was on top of his game, taking over the world. Then he met Billie. She changed him, brought him back down to earth. Then he was parading around with her, the woman of his dreams, and then everything came crashing down, leaving him lower than ever. His father didn't want him. She didn't want him. What did he have left? As the waves lapped to shore, he recalled the events at the gala. The enormous screen illustrated he was indeed French and German, but not his father's son. For so many years he wanted to prove himself to Martin. To earn his love. To show that he could be as powerful and wealthy. To be just like his father. Only, he wasn't. Not at all. For a while by then, but especially at that moment, Rhodes didn't want to turn out like Martin, not only because he lacked love in his life but also heart. He did not want a massive bank portfolio but 8 failed marriages. That was not his future. Martin Bishop may not have been alone, but surely, he was lonely and always wanting the next best thing, the better property, the bigger yacht, the younger wife. Martin had everything he could buy but not what was most important. Rhodes wasn't his son, but he was still Scarlett's brother and Mama's grandson. He rushed from the beach to Mansion Mile. When he got to the house, his grandmother and sister were in the living room. The TV was on in the background, but they weren't watching it. Instead, they sat close together, both wearing pajamas, and passing a carton of Coco's Cones chocolate ice cream back and forth and talking in hushed tones. Scarlett clutched the stuffed animal bunny she'd had since she was a little girl. "Rhodes," Scarlett said when she spotted him. She rushed over and gave him a hug. "I was worried about you." "Thanks, sis." "I'm still your sister?" she asked. She was smart, very smart, but he realized that she might have a tough time understanding what had gone on. "Of course, you are, always." "You're my jelly bean," he said, using his nickname for her and ruffling her hair. She beamed a smile. "Want some ice cream?" "I would love some." He took off his tie and settled on the sofa. "Big night," Mama said. "I'll say. First Martin then." "Did Billie break up with you?" Mama asked. His eyebrows shot up as he realized something that fueled him with hope. She still had the ring. But what he couldn't say was that he wasn't entirely sure they were together to begin with. She'd probably have Betty or someone else from work return it. "I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. Not who I am or what's going to happen." Memo passed him the carton of ice cream and placed her hands on her knees. "I've had to do a few hard things in my life and I'll tell you what, with each one of them, I learned a lot about myself and grew as a person." The ice cream was cold in his hands. Scarlett helped herself to it as Memo went on. "I know you came to Blue Bay Beach to build a resort. I also knew you were avoiding visiting me because I think even then you were conflicted. Yes, you created jobs to help people to pay their bills and put their kids through school and save for retirement, but you also took something away from them, community, a livelihood," history. I understand that you want to build, expand, and grow, but try to see how this lesson might help you grow as a person. He took a deep breath while also taking in her message. If you build the resort, there will be a pool, but there won't be Coco's cones, beach wave salon. Mama and I got our nails done for the gala there. The souvenir shop will be gone and that candy store. Also, Mama's favorite, Coconut Cove Café. We had lunch there yesterday. Scarlett passed the ice cream back to him. Plus this ice cream is really, really good. Rhodes's lips lifted into a smile, but inside he felt like he was dissolving, breaking apart, shrinking, not growing. Mama placed her hand on his shoulder. Rhodes, what you wanted to create, the idea of an idyllic paradise with all the quaint touches already exists. Blue Bay Beach was better than a resort. It was special and it was real. So was Billie. You're right, but if I don't build resorts, what will I do? Different parts of himself, ones he'd rarely had contact with, went to war. Just remember, everything has a way of working out. Mama kissed the top of his head and excused herself to bed. Scarlett soon followed, leaving him with an empty carton of ice cream and an emptiness inside he wasn't sure how to fill. Days turned into weeks as Rhodes hid out at the mansion. He hadn't taken much more than a day off since he'd started building his empire, but it seemed to have washed away when he learned the truth about his father. Still no word from his mother on who his actual dad was, and lost Billie. If he couldn't have her, he didn't want any of it. At that moment, he realized, the most valuable real estate he had was his heart and it belonged to her. But if he couldn't build things or have her, what did that leave him with? Then it came to him. If he couldn't build, he'd save, he'd preserve. He'd already looked into what his limitations were in terms of the historical properties in Blue Bay Beach. He'd start there. He made a few phone calls and over the course of the morning, he assured several people he was no longer interested in leveling the town, but protecting it from guys like himself. It took some convincing and a few more tense conversations, but he was sure he was making the right decision to invest much of the money he would have spent on the resort, and instead see to it that no one could interfere with the quaint town again. After a particularly difficult talk with his primary investors, he escaped to the patio outside his bedroom on the second floor of Mama's house. He had a view of the ocean and took a deep breath, relieved that his grandmother, Billie, Betty, and everyone else would be able to enjoy its shores for decades to come. He sat down on the chair and voices filtered from the porch below. "You are too sweet." "Thank you, Billie," Mama said. A thrill raced through Rhodes at the same time as his heart caught in his throat. She was there to return the ring. "I remember you saying you have bimini bread with your breakfast, so I thought you'd enjoy a fresh loaf." Billie's voice was like a summer song, a melody that made him feel the sunshine even though it was cloudy. "It's still warm. This is lovely. I also brought a few photos I thought you'd like. They're from my parents' collection. My mother was an avid photographer. I saw some photos of her in the cafe. She was as talented behind the lens as she was beautiful in front of it. Just like you, dear." Rhodes imagined a blush warming Billie's cheeks. The two spent a few minutes talking about the photos as Mama looked through them. "I noticed the temporary office for the resort is gone. We're relieved but wary. Any word from Rhodes? I wasn't sure if I should call or..." He stiffened at the sound of his name, feeling like a sneak listening, but he wasn't sure she'd want to see him. "I have had word from him. In fact, I've never seen him so." Mama paused as though searching for the right words. Determined yet distressed. "He's a big, powerful man like his grandfather, but dealing with emotions is different than doing business." "I want to give you the ring back," Billie said. Rhodes's chest shattered. He knew it was coming but didn't expect it to cause so much pain. He gripped the arm of the chair to steel himself from the wave of feelings engulfing him. "You know, when we came here that night, we weren't really a couple." At last Billie confessed the truth. "Oh no." Mama's voice was sly, like she knew that they'd told a big fib. "Perhaps not officially, but I saw a spark. A promise. I felt it, I really did, but we just can't be together. We're from different worlds. Not to mention he wants to build a resort in my town. I just don't see how it could work between us." "But you said the office is gone," Mama reminded her. "Yeah. I'm guessing they found something permanent." "I'm not so sure. I knew Rhodes was searching to fill something inside, to prove himself to Martin. I knew he needed to fall in love, and that might just save Blue Bay Beach. He couldn't imagine what Billie was thinking. It all just happened so fast. I think I got caught up in things. Thank you for being understanding, Mrs. Thorpe. That was it. She was leaving. Remember the story I told you of that ring? Like with Rhodes Sr. and me, sometimes the amount of time doesn't matter. It's the depth of the connection. It may have been happening fast, but you have the rest of your lives to slow things down. So you knew we weren't really engaged and you went along with it. Surprise elevated Billie's voice an octave. I had a suspicion. I went too easy on my daughter. Look how she turned out. I don't always go easy on Rhodes. Then again, he was in town and didn't even stop by until you needed help. That says something. Plus, I have to keep myself entertained. Mama's tone suggested she knew he was listening. Was that what the staring contest was about? To see if one of us would look away first. Mama chuckled softly. Ages ago I heard about a study that if two people asked each other the right questions and gazed into each other's eyes for 4 minutes, they'd fall in love. Did it work? Did we ask each other the right questions? You tell me. Rhodes rushed down the stairs. He couldn't let the opportunity to ask the right question and tell her the truest truth he knew slip through his fingers even if the ring had come off.
Chapter 13. Billie. Loud footsteps pounded toward where Mama sat in the rocking chair on the front porch. Billie had just gotten to her feet and had her fingers on the engagement ring, preparing to take it off, but the humidity had caused her skin to swell and she was having a tough time. Wait. Rhodes's low and rumbly voice called. Billie's heart leaped in her chest. How about you two go take a walk in the garden so you can talk privately, Mama suggested. Maybe the beach instead? Rhodes asked. I promise, we won't let the ring fly into the water. Billie nodded, not sure what to make of his sudden appearance. She'd imagined he was in his lair, hatching plans to bulldoze Blue Bay Beach. As they crossed the street, Billie wasn't sure what to do with her arms or hands since she still wore the ring. She tugged on it a few more times when they reached the sand. Not yet. Please, just listen to what I have to say. They were standing toe to toe, and she swallowed hard. Okay. I know I showed up here full of bravado and swagger. I'm still that guy, but Mama was talking to me about how hardship can help a person to grow. Well, I'm in the business of building, so while I may still be a cocky jerk from time to time, I want to be better for you, for us, for the future of Blue Bay Beach. You said we can't make things work between us, but I have to ask you an important question. What do you value, Billie? She drew a long breath. I value independence, freedom, and being able to make my own choices. He nodded. Me too, and I choose you. I don't think it's a mistake that ring on your finger returned to my grandparents, but I'm not entirely sure it was intended for them. I think it came from the past to teach us a lesson. But we're not meant to be together. Remember, we have different goals and are from different worlds. We're enemies. It would seem that way. Call it fate or destiny, but I believe we were meant to get to know each other. I also value growth and building. Do you mean seeking and destroying? She was almost more afraid of what would happen if he laid down his arms. She knew how to fight for her town, but not for love. That was a battle she feared she'd lose in the end. No, please listen to me. Give me a chance to explain. It's true I'm about seeking opportunities to improve things and create jobs for people, but I'm not going to destroy those very things in the process. Does that mean no resort? Hope flared inside of her, then faded, because if that fight was over, she faced a bigger one. That means all the funds I was going to invest go to preserving the town and preventing idiots like me from getting any bright ideas. I kind of like this town. Maybe even love it. He captured her gaze in his. Reminded of their staring contest and the connection they shared, maybe the fight for love would be worth it. Maybe she could endure it and maybe even enjoy it. The wind blew a loose piece of her hair in her face and he brushed it away. He leaned in and took a deep breath as though catching her scent of coconut, of the beach, and summer. I might even be tired of wearing suits all the time, he whispered. But you look good in a suit. You think so? A smirk bloomed on her face. I do. I like the sound of those two words coming out of your mouth. The ring practically pulsed on her finger, like it had a flashing light. She gazed into his dark eyes. When we met, I saw sadness in your eyes. Not sad. Rugged. Man. He thumped his chest like a caveman. She knocked him with her hip. I guess I knew there was something off in my life, something missing. Now you know why, and I want to have my own family. I want you to be my family, Billie. Rhodes reached to lace his fingers in hers and something fell out of his pocket. She bent over to pick up what looked like an old order slip from the restaurant. She unfolded it and read, "Will you go on a date with me?" She straightened. You saved this? I was hoping I could cash it in some time. Betty's insistence that she go through with the dare and everything that had happened since spun in Billie's mind. Maybe it was meant to be. She tucked the note in her pocket. That night after the gala, I told you that I'm not the kind of woman you're used to. That's one of the many things I like about you. She took a deep breath, mustering her courage, but as the words came to her tongue, they felt as natural and perfect as the sun settling over the horizon. At last, she could reveal the truth because she knew she was strong enough to handle whatever came next. Rhodes, will you go on a date with me? A long date. Maybe we'll start on August 14 and end somewhere around, oh, I don't know. 50, 60 years or so. It was as though what she said took a moment to register. He blinked a few times, then a smile tugged the corners of his mouth wide. He scooped her into his arms, then set her back down before planting his lips on hers. It was a long, luxurious, and lavish kiss that made her sparkle inside like the sun on the water as the clouds parted to reveal the setting sun. His hands drifted along her neck, followed by his lips, dusting her collarbone before returning to her mouth. He kissed her in response to her question, in forgiveness, in hope, and with a promise. The gentle scratch of his stubble made her cheeks pink, the way he liked it. Then the kiss deepened as the sun descended for the day. But the power behind the kiss told Billie that they'd see many, many more sunsets and sunrises. When they finally parted, Billie drew a long breath. You haven't answered. I do like the way that ring looks on your finger. He kissed her knuckles, the inside of her wrist, and up her arm. He planted one more kiss on her lips, then said, Yes, Billie. I would be honored to marry you, but I have one condition. She arched an eyebrow. We hold the ceremony and reception on the beach, and you let me fix your house, the dock, and the roof of the restaurant. That was 3 conditions. Let's not get carried away. This is my promise to you. For as long as we're married, I will take care of you. You will let me. I will send you flowers and chocolates. I'll fix leaky sinks and roofs. I will take you on trips and out for fancy meals. I will rub your feet after a long day working. I promise to show you the world, but will always bring you back home. You'll really do all that? I'll do more. She lit up all over. And I'll let you. I'll love you. I do love you, Rhodes. She circled her arms around his neck and lifted onto her toes. I love you, Billie. He held her gaze then and wouldn't let go. Not for the first uncomfortable minute. Not for the next one that softened them. Not even for the third, where the magic, the crackling, and the electricity sparked. And not for the fourth minute when she was sure that what they had wasn't the result of an experiment or circumstance. It was something real. Epilogue. The weeks leading up to the wedding date, exactly 6 months since Valentine's Day when they'd supposedly met, Billie fluttered around her room, filled with a mixture of excitement and something else she couldn't quite put her finger on as she got ready with Isley, Claudia, and Betty. Courtesy of the latter, oldies played in the background. Coco, Isley's daughter, bounced on the bed with her stuffed bunny and the dog sat nearby looking out the window. Mama and Scarlett would arrive any moment. Although the wedding party was small, just the 5 of them, along with 5 of Rhodes's friends and cousins, the entire town was invited. It was Billie's decision and maybe that's what made her nervous or like she'd forgotten something important. "Your makeup is perfect," Isley said. "As is your hair," Claudia chimed in. "I can't help but feel like something is missing." "Have you girls heard the saying something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue?" Betty asked. The 3 women nodded. "She has something new, friendship." "Something borrowed?" "The gown with thanks to Mama." It was the dress Mama had worn when she and Mr. Thorpe had renewed their vows on their 25th anniversary. It was a soft white, off-the-shoulder gown with fine embroidery on the bodice and a flowing skirt that reached her ankles and swirled when she moved. "I like how it's vintage." "And who thought something so traditional could also be so beachy?" "So perfectly you," Claudia added. "There's something blue, your eyes and heart for this town." "But you're missing something old and don't you dare say me." Betty winked. She unfolded a silk handkerchief that also had a retro 50s look. She pulled out a gold locket in the shape of a seashell. "Betty, this looks brand new." "You didn't have to," Billie started. Betty interrupted. "Open it." Billie did so and inside was a small black and white photo of her parents. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. As Betty clasped it around her neck, she no longer felt like anything was missing. Not a thing. From outside came a honk. The limo had arrived. Rhodes didn't have too much to say about the wedding details, but he wanted to spoil Billie, so she went along with the limo ride for the 3 blocks to the beach. She teetered in the high heels as everyone helped her outside. Thankfully, the porch had been repaired and she didn't get stuck in a loose or broken board. Soon, the limo pulled up to the beach. Guests filled the many chairs. Everyone was there, including Alvin and Elmer. It wasn't a small affair, but there wasn't a lot of fuss despite Mama's offer for an extravagant, over-the-top wedding. Well, maybe a little bit with the makeshift boardwalk lined with rose petals, the arched canopy atop the podium, and sprays of every kind of white flower imaginable. The pastor stood beneath the arch along with Rhodes and his groomsmen, all looking dapper. The wedding party gathered, giggled, and made sure Billie was ready before the music started. As she waited for the others to go ahead of her, she felt settled, relaxed, and like her parents were there with her even though she walked the aisle alone. It was fitting, leaving her old, solo life behind and entering into a partnership with Rhodes. She kicked off her high heels, happy to feel the sand under her feet. When she reached him and he took her hands, his breath caught. They were really doing it. She found her smile and it seemed to light him up. His dark eyes sparkled as they danced over her. He mouthed, "You look beautiful." After a greeting and a reading by the pastor, the pair said their vows. A few people hooted and whistled after the idos were exchanged. Just before they kissed, their eyes met, sealing their promise to each other with something more powerful than words or rings, but light and love exchanged that could never be broken. The reception was held at the Cove Café. It spilled onto the patio, down the dock, and onto the beach. As the sun set, a bonfire was lit, the lights and tiki torches came on. Courtesy of Isley's talents, a massive ice cream cake was kept cold until time for dessert. Billie's father's mint green Chevy waited on the road. The girls had strung cans from the back bumper and attached a sign that said "Just Married." Since she got to plan the wedding, Rhodes made arrangements for the surprise honeymoon. Betty assured her the restaurant would be in good hands for the 2 weeks they'd be gone. Soon, Claudia and Carter announced that they were going to play a special song for the new couple's first dance. When the first strains of Unchained Melody sounded, Rhodes took her in his arms, placing a gentle hand on the small of her back and clasping the other. They swayed together, getting lost in the music, lost in each other. He sang the lyrics in her ear, tickling the small hairs there, making her feel at once serene and stirred up like one of the colorful and fruity drinks for the guests. Partway through, Billie lifted to her toes to reach Rhodes's ear. "This was not how I expected my summer to end. It's not over. It's only August." "You're right. It's just the beginning." She smiled happily. "I love you." It feels really good to finally say that out loud. "I love you, Billie. I've loved you since we gazed into each other's eyes. I guess Momo really was right. Things have a way of working out, and I'll add that it doesn't matter if it's the beginning, middle or end. If something is meant to be, it'll happen. That's the truth." At that, Rhodes planted a kiss on her lips.